The night was unusually cold for October, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you question every decision that led you to this moment. Jessica Morgan, a 23-year-old freelance photographer, sat in her dimly lit apartment, scrolling through Craigslist on her laptop. She had been searching for an antique camera for weeks, something with character, something that could tell stories before she even loaded the film. Her eyes caught an ad posted just 12 minutes ago. Antique camera, cheap price, must pick up tonight, serious inquiries only. The price was unbelievably low, almost too good to be true. The seller had a 5-star rating from 14 past sales, with comments like fast response and polite and professional. But something about the ad felt off. No seller name, just a burner email and an address on the outskirts of town, a place where the streetlights gave up and the asphalt crumbled into gravel. Jessica hesitated, her finger hovering over the trackpad. She glanced at the clock, 1:47 a.m. Her roommate Claire had been asleep since 9 p.m., her door firmly shut. Jessica bit her lip, then typed out a quick text, checking out a camera, back by 3. If I'm late, send cops to this address. She attached the address from the Craigslist ad and hit send. Claire didn't reply, but Jessica told herself it was fine. She was just being paranoid. Still, as she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "This is a bad idea." The drive took 40 minutes, the city lights fading into a dense, oppressive darkness. Pine Hollow Road was a snake of dirt winding through skeletal oaks, their branches clawing at her dented Honda like gnarled fingers. No porch lights, no cars, just a crooked mailbox with 67 spray painted in red. The house hunched behind it, a 2-story Victorian with boarded windows, paint peeling like sunburned skin. Jessica killed the engine and sat for a moment, her breath fogging the windshield. Her phone showed no signal. The cold seeped in as she stepped out, leaves crunching like bone shards under her boots. A shadow moved behind the front door's frosted glass. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He looked ordinary, mid-40s, receding hairline, wearing a frayed cardigan. "Jessica?" His voice was buttered toast, warm and inviting. "I'm Robert. Come in. It's freezing." She forced a smile and followed him inside, the hallway smelling of mothballs and something sweet beneath, like rotting fruit. Robert gestured to a love seat in the parlor. "I'll get the camera. Coffee?" She declined, her eyes darting around the room. The floral wallpaper bubbled with damp. A grandfather clock ticked arrhythmically. And there, behind the armchair, a smeared handprint on the baseboard, rust-colored. Robert disappeared upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the creaking wood. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at the door, then back at the staircase. The room felt wrong, like it was alive, watching her. She heard a faint banging, muffled but insistent, coming from a room down the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Against her better judgment, she stood and crept toward it, her boots silent on the worn carpet. She pushed the door open. A naked bulb swung, casting jagged shadows. The walls were plastered with photos, women, dozens of them, all young, all dark-haired like her. Newspaper clippings, local student missing since 2019, remains found in State Park. A workbench held tools, pliers, a hacksaw, a Polaroid camera, and in the corner, a metal cage. The source of the banging. A woman inside chained, her eyes wide with terror. She mouthed the words, "Help me." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back, her mind racing. She had to get out, now. But as she turned, Robert was there, blocking the doorway. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, empty stare. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said, his voice flat. Jessica's instincts kicked in. She grabbed a rusty screwdriver from the workbench and lunged at him, catching him off guard. He grunted as the tool grazed his arm, and she bolted past him, down the hall, toward the front door. But the door was locked. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands shaking. Behind her, Robert's footsteps grew louder. She yanked the door open and sprinted into the night, the cold air biting her face. Her car was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. She heard him behind her, his breathing ragged. She dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, his face twisted in rage. "You're not leaving," he screamed. Jessica turned the key, but the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning it again. This time the engine roared to life. She slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel. Robert jumped back as she peeled out, the car fishtailing as she sped down the dirt road. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her hands gripped the wheel, her knuckles white. The road seemed endless, the trees closing in on either side. She glanced at her phone, still no signal. She had to get to the main road. She had to find help. But then headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. Robert's truck. He was gaining on her. Jessica's heart raced. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the car lurching forward. The truck was right behind her now, its high beams blinding. She swerved, trying to shake him, but he stayed on her tail. The road curved sharply, and she took the turn too fast, the car skidding off the road and into the trees. The airbag deployed, slamming into her chest. Dazed, she fumbled with the seatbelt, her vision blurry. The truck stopped behind her, its engine idling. Jessica stumbled out of the car, her legs wobbly. She had to run. She had to hide. She plunged into the woods, the branches tearing at her clothes. The moon was her only light, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. "Jessica," he called, his voice sing-song, taunting. "You can't run forever." She ducked behind a tree, her chest heaving. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to silence her breathing. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. She could see his shadow just a few feet away. He was listening, waiting. She closed her eyes, praying he wouldn't find her. Then a twig snapped. She froze. He was right there. She could smell him, sweat and something metallic. Blood. "Found you," he whispered. Jessica screamed and bolted, running blindly through the trees. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness swallowing her whole. She tripped over a root, falling hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself up, limping forward. She could see lights ahead, a house. She ran toward it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one answered. The house was dark, abandoned. Robert's laughter echoed behind her. "No one's coming to save you, Jessica." She turned, backing away from him. Her back hit the wall of the house, and she slid down, sobbing. He stood over her, a knife glinting in his hand. "You should have just bought the camera," he said, his voice almost sad. "Now look where we are." But then, sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Robert's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "No," he whispered. He turned and ran, disappearing into the woods. Jessica collapsed, her body shaking with relief. The police cars screeched to a halt, their lights flooding the yard. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Jessica Morgan," one of them called. "Here!" she croaked, her voice barely audible. They rushed to her, wrapping her in a blanket and helping her to her feet. "Your friend called us," the officer said. "She said you might be in trouble." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He's still out there," she said, pointing to the woods. "He's got a woman, in a cage." The officers radioed for backup, then headed into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jessica sat in the back of a patrol car, watching as they searched. It felt like hours before they emerged, leading Robert in handcuffs. Behind them, paramedics carried the woman from the cage, her face pale but alive. Jessica closed her eyes, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. As Jessica sat in the hospital waiting room, wrapped in a thin blanket and clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, an officer approached her with an update. The woman from the cage had been identified as Sarah Collins, a 21-year-old college student who had gone missing 2 years ago. She had been lured by a similar Craigslist ad, just like Jessica, and had been held captive ever since. Sarah had endured unimaginable horrors, forced to pose for Robert's sickening photo collection, starved and tortured. The officer's voice trembled as he explained that Robert had been using the antique camera as bait for years, targeting young women who fit his type. Jessica's stomach churned as she realized how close she had come to sharing Sarah's fate. The thought of what could have happened, the cage, the tools on the workbench, the Polaroid camera, sent a shiver down her spine. She stared at her hands, still trembling, and wondered if she'd ever feel safe again. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale of survival and the darkness that lurks behind seemingly innocent opportunities, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Remember, the world can be a dangerous place, and sometimes the most ordinary decisions can lead to the most extraordinary horrors. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and always trust your instincts.
Next story.
The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Katelyn had been working her food delivery job for over a year now, and while it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills. She didn't mind the late-night shifts. In fact, she preferred them. The streets were emptier, the orders were fewer, and the tips were sometimes surprisingly generous. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the faint hum of the city seemed distant, almost muffled. Her phone buzzed in her hand, breaking the silence. It was another delivery request. She glanced at the screen and frowned. The address was on the outskirts of the city, a place she rarely ventured to, especially at this hour. She was about to decline when her eyes caught the note attached to the order. "We'll tip $100 for delivery. Please come quickly." $100? That was more than she made in an entire night. Her hesitation wavered. It was just one delivery, and the money would cover her rent for the week. She accepted the order, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the screen. The GPS led her out of the city, the streetlights growing sparse as the buildings thinned out. The road twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. She checked her phone again, making sure she hadn't taken a wrong turn. The address was correct, but there was no sign of civilization. Just as she was about to turn back, the headlights of her car illuminated a pair of wrought iron gates. They were massive, adorned with intricate designs that seemed to twist and writhe in the dim light. Beyond the gates, a long driveway stretched into the darkness, lined with towering trees that seemed to close in on her as she drove forward. The mansion came into view slowly, its silhouette emerging from the shadows like a beast waking from slumber. It was enormous, with towering spires and windows that reflected the moonlight like cold, unblinking eyes. Katelyn parked her car near the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. The place was eerily silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. She grabbed the food bag and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. As she approached the door, two figures emerged from the shadows. They were dressed in expensive black coats and gloves, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses despite the late hour. They didn't say a word, simply gestured for her to enter the mansion. Katelyn hesitated. "I can just leave the food here," she said, her voice trembling. One of the guards shook his head. "We're not allowed to receive it. You'll have to take it inside." Reluctantly, she stepped through the doors, the heavy wood creaking as it closed behind her. The interior of the mansion was even more opulent than she had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light refracting off the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach churn. She was about to call out when an elderly woman appeared at the top of a grand staircase. She was strikingly beautiful, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, however, were cold and calculating, and they locked onto Katelyn with an intensity that made her shiver. "Thank you for coming, dear," the woman said, her voice smooth and melodic. "You must be exhausted from the drive. Why don't you come in and rest for a while?" Katelyn shook her head, clutching the food bag tightly. "I really can't. My husband is waiting for me at home." The woman's smile didn't waver. "Nonsense. It's late, and you've come all this way. Just a few minutes to catch your breath." Her tone was gentle but insistent, and before Katelyn could protest further, the woman was descending the stairs, her hand extended as if to guide her. Against her better judgment, Katelyn followed. The woman led her through a series of ornate hallways, each more lavish than the last. But as they turned a corner, Katelyn froze. The room before her was filled with people, all wearing black hoods and masks that obscured their faces. Candles lined the walls, their flickering light casting grotesque shadows on the faces of the figures. In the center of the room was a large circular table adorned with strange symbols and what looked like dried blood. Katelyn's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a dinner party. This was something far more sinister. The woman's hand tightened around her arm, her nails digging into Katelyn's skin. "Welcome, my dear," she said, her voice now dripping with malice. "We've been waiting for you." Katelyn tried to pull away, but the woman's grip was like iron. The masked figures began to chant, their voices low and guttural, rising in volume until they filled the room. Katelyn's heart raced as she realized the truth. She wasn't here to deliver food. She was the offering. The woman leaned in close, her breath hot against Katelyn's ear. "You're going to play a little game with us," she whispered. "Hide and seek. If you can escape before we find you, you're free to go. But if we catch you—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Katelyn's mind raced. She had to get out of here. Now. The woman released her arm, and Katelyn didn't hesitate. She bolted, her feet slamming against the marble floor as she sprinted down the hallway. Behind her, she could hear the sound of footsteps, the chanting growing louder as the masked figures gave chase. She turned a corner, her lungs burning as she pushed herself to run faster. The mansion was a labyrinth, its hallways twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. She could hear them getting closer, their laughter echoing off the walls. She ducked into a room, slamming the door shut behind her. It was a study, filled with bookshelves and a large desk. She crouched behind the desk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door creaked open, and she held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. Footsteps entered the room, slow and deliberate. She could see their shadows moving across the floor, their masked faces scanning the room. One of them stopped in front of the desk, their head tilting as if they could sense her presence. Katelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the desk. The figure leaned down, their mask inches from her face. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, the sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the mansion, and the figure straightened up, turning to leave the room. Katelyn waited until the footsteps faded before she dared to move. She crept out from behind the desk, her legs shaking as she made her way to the door. She peered out into the hallway, her eyes darting back and forth. The coast was clear, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She had to find a way out. She moved quickly, her footsteps light as she navigated the maze-like halls. Every creak, every whisper of wind made her jump, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She turned a corner and froze. At the end of the hallway was a door slightly ajar with moonlight streaming through the crack. It was her chance. She sprinted towards it, her heart pounding in her ears. But just as she reached the door, a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She screamed, thrashing against the grip, but it was no use. The masked figure pulled her close, their breath hot against her face. "You're not going anywhere," they hissed. Katelyn's mind raced. She had to think fast. With all her strength, she kicked out, her foot connecting with the figure's knee. They stumbled, their grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She didn't look back, didn't stop to see if they were following. She burst through the door, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She was outside, but she wasn't safe yet. The mansion loomed behind her, its windows glowing with an unnatural light. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, the chanting growing louder as the figures emerged from the house. She ran, her feet slipping on the wet grass as she made her way towards the gates. They were still open, but she could see the guards moving to close them. She had to make it. She had to. Her lungs burned, her legs aching as she pushed herself to run faster. The gates were closing, the gap narrowing with every second. She dove through the opening just as the gates slammed shut behind her. She didn't stop, didn't look back. She ran to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and she sped down the driveway, the mansion disappearing in her rearview mirror. But even as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching her, their eyes following her every move. She didn't stop until she was back in the city, the bright lights and familiar streets a welcome relief. But as she pulled into her driveway, she noticed something on the passenger seat, a black hood, identical to the ones worn by the masked figures, and pinned to it was a note, "We'll see you soon." Katelyn's blood ran cold. She sat in her car, her hands trembling as she stared at the black hood on the passenger seat. She couldn't tell her husband. He'd never believe her, and she didn't want to drag him into whatever nightmare she'd stumbled into. Taking a deep breath, she stuffed the hood into her bag, wiped her face, and forced herself to act normal. When she walked inside, her husband greeted her with a smile, completely unaware of the terror she'd just endured. She told him it had been a long night, and he didn't ask questions. Over the next few days, she tried to move on, but every shadow, every sound, made her heart race. She quit her food delivery job without explanation, never daring to venture out late at night again. She never spoke of what happened, burying the memory deep down. But no matter how hard she tried to forget, the fear stayed with her, a constant reminder that some horrors never truly let you go. If you enjoyed Katelyn's terrifying story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that will keep you on edge. And remember, The real monsters aren't the ones in stories. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Stay cautious, stay aware, and trust your instincts, because danger doesn't always come with a warning.
Next story.
The rain hammered down in relentless waves, turning the quiet suburban streets into slick black mirrors. Isabella shivered under the flickering streetlight, her breath coming out in short, visible puffs. The fight with Daniel played on a loop in her mind, his voice tight with frustration, hers breaking with exhaustion. "I just need to get out of here," she had snapped before slamming the door behind her. Now, standing alone in the empty night, regret gnawed at her. She pulled out her phone, the screen casting a pale glow on her face, 12:37 a.m. The rideshare app showed a driver 4 minutes away. She hesitated, then tapped confirm. A black sedan rolled up right on time, its wipers struggling against the downpour. The window slid down, revealing a man with thinning brown hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Isabella?" She nodded, forcing herself to move. The back seat smelled like pine air freshener and something faintly metallic. She buckled in, her wet clothes sticking to the leather. The driver, Greg, according to the app, adjusted the rearview mirror just enough to keep her in his line of sight. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice smooth. She swallowed. "Don't engage, just get home." But the silence stretched too long. "Yeah, long day," he hummed in response, fingers tapping the wheel. "You know, people don't realize how much you can tell about someone just from their energy. You seem tense." A cold prickle ran down her spine. Weird thing to say. She glanced at her phone, 12% battery. The GPS showed the usual route home, straight down Maple Avenue, but then the car turned left instead. The app says to go straight," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. Greg chuckled. "Construction up ahead, this way's faster." She swallowed, pulse quickening. The streetlights grew fewer, the road narrowing into a tunnel of trees. No construction signs, no detours, just darkness closing in. Then she saw it. Bunched up on the floor behind the passenger seat was a dark coat, half hidden under a fast food bag. The sleeve was streaked with something reddish-brown, dried blood. Her breath hitched. "Don't panic. Don't let him know you saw." She forced her gaze away, but her hands trembled. "You okay back there?" Greg's voice was calm, but his eyes in the mirror were sharp, watching. "Yeah, just tired." She gripped her phone tighter, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But what would she say? "My driver took a wrong turn." She had no proof, no way to explain the dread coiling in her stomach. The trees outside grew thicker, no houses, no streetlights, just the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the too loud sound of her own breathing. Then the car slowed. Greg pulled onto a dirt path, barely visible in the rain. "Quick pit stop," he said lightly. Isabella's heart jackhammered. No. She glanced at her phone. 5%. 1 bar of signal. "I really just want to go home," she said, voice shaking. "Won't take long." His tone was pleasant, but his fingers flexed on the wheel. The car rolled to a stop beside an abandoned shed, its roof sagging under the weight of the storm. Isabella's fingers found the door handle, locked. Greg turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. Then he reached under his seat. She didn't wait to see what he grabbed. With a scream, she slammed her elbow into the window. The glass cracked but held. Greg lunged for her, but she kicked wildly, her heel connecting with his jaw. He snarled, blood blooming at the corner of his mouth. She yanked the door handle again. It clicked open. Rain and wind assaulted her as she bolted into the trees, branches clawing at her arms. Behind her, the car door slammed. "Isabella!" His voice wasn't human anymore. It was a snarl, a predator's cry. She ran blindly, her shoes slipping in the mud. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. She ducked behind a fallen log, pressing a hand to her mouth to stifle her sobs. Phone, call someone, but the screen flashed 1%. The twig snapped, close, too close. Greg's voice slithered through the darkness. "You can't hide forever." She squeezed her eyes shut, tears mixing with the rain. "Daniel, please, I'm sorry." Daniel paced the living room, his phone clutched in his hand. The fight replayed in his head. Why had he let her leave like that? He checked his messages again. Nothing. Then he remembered. She had shared her live location with him earlier that day. He pulled up the app, his stomach dropping as the little blue dot moved further and further from the usual route. She wasn't heading home. He zoomed in. The car had turned onto a back road, then stopped near the old Forestry Service path. No one goes there. His blood ran cold. Grabbing his keys and the pistol he kept in the nightstand, a gift from his cop brother he'd never thought he'd need, he sprinted to his car. The tires screeched as he peeled out of the driveway. The app refreshed. She wasn't moving anymore. Isabella's lungs burned. She could hear Greg getting closer, his footsteps methodical, like he was enjoying the hunt. Time stretched, warped. Seconds bled into minutes. She stayed frozen, hidden, as if the darkness itself had swallowed her whole. Then headlights. A car skidded to a stop on the road nearby. A door opened. "Isabella!" Daniel's voice. She sobbed in relief, stumbling toward the light. But as she broke through the trees, Greg's hand clamped around her wrist. His breath was hot against her ear. "You should have stayed in the car." She screamed and the world exploded in gunfire. Greg collapsed, his grip loosening. Daniel stood 10 feet away, his face pale, his hands shaking around the pistol. Isabella crumpled into his arms, her body racked with sobs. "How did you—" "Your location," he breathed, holding her tighter. "You never turned it off." Sirens wailed in the distance. The police would come, the questions would come. But for now, the only sound was the rain and the ragged, terrified breaths of the woman who almost didn't make it home. As the red and blue lights flickered through the trees, Isabella buried her face in Daniel's chest, shaking. "I thought I was going to die." He kissed the top of her head, his voice raw. "Never again. You're never getting in a stranger's car again." If this chilling tale slithered under your skin, don't forget to subscribe and let the darkness in, because the next story waits, coiled in the shadows, ready to strike. Turn on notifications. You wouldn't want to miss the scream. And remember, the next ride you hail might not take you home.
Next story.
Bella had always been a dreamer. Growing up in a small, picturesque town in Italy, she had spent her childhood imagining a life beyond the rolling hills and cobblestone streets. When the opportunity came to study abroad in the United States, she seized it with both hands, eager to embrace the adventure. Her new life in the bustling city was everything she had hoped for. Vibrant, fast-paced, and full of possibilities. She moved into a cozy apartment on the edge of the city, a place that felt like a sanctuary amidst the chaos. It was small but charming, with large windows that let in the golden light of sunset every evening. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. She made friends at her university, explored the city, and even found a favorite coffee shop just a block away from her apartment. But then, The calls started. It was a Thursday evening when her phone first rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway, assuming it was a classmate or perhaps a delivery person. The voice on the other end was deep and calm, almost soothing. "Hello, Bella," it said. "How was your day?" She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The voice knew her name. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The caller didn't answer. Instead, they simply repeated the question, "How was your day?" Bella hung up, her hands shaking. She told herself it was a wrong number, a prank, anything to ease the unease settling in her chest. But the calls kept coming. Every evening, like clockwork, the phone would ring, and the same voice would ask about her day. At first she tried to ignore them, but curiosity, or perhaps dread, got the better of her, and she began answering. The caller never revealed their identity, but they seemed to know everything about her. They mentioned her favorite coffee order, the books she was reading, even the color of the dress she had worn to class that day. It was as if they were watching her, always just out of sight. The calls grew more sinister over time. The voice began to comment on her routines, her habits, her fears. "You shouldn't walk home alone after dark, Bella," they said one evening. "The streets aren't safe for someone like you." She felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" The caller didn't respond. Instead, they simply hung up, leaving her in silence. Bella's anxiety grew with each passing day. She started double-checking the locks on her doors and windows, peering over her shoulder on her way home, and avoiding eye contact with strangers. She confided in her friends, but they brushed it off as paranoia. "It's just some creep," they said. "Block the number and move on." But Bella couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, after another unsettling call, she decided to go to the police. She sat in the cold, sterile station, recounting the details to an officer who seemed more interested in his coffee than her story. "We'll look into it," he said, his tone dismissive. "But without any concrete evidence, there's not much we can do." Bella left the station feeling more helpless than ever. The calls continued, each one more invasive than the last. The caller began to describe her apartment in detail, the way her curtains fluttered in the breeze, the way she hummed to herself while cooking, the way she cried herself to sleep at night. It was as if they were there, in the room with her, watching her every move. She started to feel like she was losing her mind. Her grades slipped, her friendships strained, and her once bright eyes grew hollow with exhaustion. She stopped answering the calls, but they didn't stop coming. The voice left voicemails, each one more chilling than the last. "You can't ignore me forever, Bella," they said. "I'm always here, always watching." One evening, after a particularly grueling day at school, Bella dragged herself into the bathroom to wash her face. The cold water felt like a slap, jolting her awake. As she reached for a towel, something caught her eye, a small black circle on the wall, just above the mirror. She frowned, leaning closer. It was no bigger than a coin, but it seemed out of place. Her heart began to race as she realized what it was, a camera. Her breath hitched, and she stumbled back, her mind racing. She tore through the apartment, searching every corner, every crevice. Her worst fears were confirmed when she found more cameras, tiny, almost invisible, hidden in the living room, the kitchen, even her bedroom. Her stomach churned as the realization hit her. Someone had been watching her. Every moment, every private detail of her life had been seen and heard by a stranger. The calls, the voicemails, the intimate knowledge, it all made sense now. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't crazy, she was being stalked. Trembling, she grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she unlocked it to call 911. But before she could dial, a notification popped up on her screen. It was a WhatsApp message from an unknown number. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The message contained a video of her in the shower taken just days ago. Below the video was a single line of text. "Don't call the cops, Bella, or everyone will see this." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her, a sob escaping her lips. She felt violated, exposed, utterly helpless. The walls of her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She sank to the floor, her mind racing. What could she do? Who could she turn to? The police hadn't believed her before. Would they believe her now? And even if they did, what would stop the stalker from releasing the video? Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. Bella sat in the corner of her bedroom, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes darting to every shadow. She felt like a hunted animal, trapped and defenseless. The phone rang again, the sound piercing the silence like a knife. She didn't answer, but the voicemail that followed was enough to send a fresh wave of terror through her. "I know you're scared, Bella," the voice said, "but you don't have to be. I just want to be close to you, to protect you. You'll see. We're meant to be together." She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the nightmare she was living. But where could she go? The stalker knew everything about her. They could be anywhere, anyone. She felt like she was suffocating, the walls closing in around her. The next few days were a blur. Bella barely slept, barely ate. She avoided her apartment as much as possible, spending her nights in the library or at friends' houses. But no matter where she went, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The stalker's messages continued, each one more menacing than the last. They knew where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. It was as if they were always one step ahead. One night, after a particularly harrowing day, Bella returned to her apartment, determined to gather her things and leave for good. She packed a bag with shaking hands, her eyes darting to every corner of the room. As she reached for her laptop, she noticed something strange, a faint red light blinking beneath her desk. Her blood ran cold as she realized it was another camera, one she had missed before. The stalker had been watching her even now, as she tried to escape. She felt a surge of anger, of defiance. She couldn't let them win. She wouldn't. With a newfound determination, Bella grabbed a hammer from her toolbox and smashed the camera, the sound of shattering plastic echoing through the room. She tore through the apartment, destroying every camera she could find. But as she reached the last one, her phone buzzed again. It was another message. "You shouldn't have done that, Bella." Before she could react, she heard a noise, a faint creak, like a floorboard shifting. Her heart stopped. She wasn't alone. The stalker was in the apartment. Panic surged through her as she grabbed her bag and bolted for the door. But it was locked, the key nowhere to be found. She could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, moving closer. She backed into a corner, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and Bella's world went black. When she woke up, she was in a dark, unfamiliar room. The air was damp and cold, and the only light came from a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Her hands were bound, her mouth gagged. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The room was small, with no windows and only one door. She could hear muffled voices outside, but they were too faint to make out. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what had happened. How had the stalker gotten into her apartment? How long had they been planning this? And most importantly, what did they want from her? The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a man, his face obscured by a mask. He didn't speak, just stood there, watching her. Bella's heart pounded as she struggled against her restraints, but it was no use. The man stepped closer, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "Don't be afraid, Bella," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I told you we were meant to be together, and now we finally are." The days, or was it weeks, blurred together in a haze of fear and despair. Bella's captor kept her isolated, only visiting to bring food or water. He spoke to her often, his words a twisted mix of affection and menace. He told her how he had been watching her for months, how he had planned every detail of her abduction. He knew everything about her, her dreams, her fears, her past. It was as if he had become a part of her, a shadow she could never escape. She tried to fight, to resist, but it was no use. He was always one step ahead, always watching. She felt her spirit breaking, her will to survive fading with each passing day. One night, as she lay on the cold, hard floor, she heard a noise outside the door. It was different this time. Not the usual footsteps, but something softer, more deliberate. Her heart raced as she strained to listen. The door creaked open and the man stepped inside, his mask still in place. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood another figure, their face obscured by the shadows. Bella's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. The man had brought someone else into her nightmare. She wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but the gag in her mouth silenced her. The two figures approached her, their eyes gleaming with a sinister light. "You're not alone anymore, Bella," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "We're going to make sure you never leave." The last thing Bella saw before the darkness consumed her was the flickering light of the bulb, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then there was nothing. No sound, no light, no hope. Bella was gone, swallowed by the shadows, her fate unknown. The police searched for her, her friends and family desperate for answers, but no trace of her was ever found. The apartment remained empty, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. And somewhere, in the darkness, Bella's story became just another unsolved mystery, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale of Bella's haunting ordeal, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that will keep you up at night. And remember, no matter how safe you feel, no matter how secure your home seems, there's always a chance someone is watching, waiting, just out of sight.
Next story.
The sun bled crimson as Brittany merged onto Highway 87, the skeletal trees clawing at the horizon like gnarled fingers reaching for the dying light. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and gasoline, the last remnants of daylight fading into an inky void. Her hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening as she glanced at her phone one last time. Daniel's final text glared up at her, the words searing into her retinas. "Turn around. Missing girl. Not safe." She scoffed, shaking her head, paranoid as always. Daniel had been warning her about this stretch of road for weeks, ever since that college student vanished without a trace. But Brittany wasn't one for ghost stories. The shortcut would save her an hour, and right now, that was worth more than his overactive imagination. The shadows swallowed the road whole as she drove deeper into the wilderness, the headlights cutting through the gloom like a knife through tar. The radio, once humming with static-laced music, dissolved into silence, then erupted in a burst of white noise before dying completely. A chill skittered down her spine, but she ignored it. Then her car choked. The engine sputtered, a death rattle shuddering through the frame before it gave out entirely. Steam hissed from the hood, curling into the cold night air like spectral fingers. Brittany cursed, slamming her palm against the wheel. No signal. No cars in sight, just the endless stretch of Highway 87, swallowed by the forest. The cold bit through her jacket as she stepped out, breath fogging in front of her. She popped the hood, staring helplessly at the mess of wires and metal. She wasn't a mechanic. She was just a girl in the middle of nowhere, alone. Then headlights. A rusted pickup slowed beside her, its engine growling like a hungry beast. The window rolled down, revealing a man with greasy hair and a smile like a knife slit. His teeth were too white, his eyes too dark. "Need help?" His voice was syrup over rot. Brittany hesitated. The woods behind her whispered, branches creaking in the wind. She had no choice. The truck reeked of bleach and something worse, something metallic, something spoiled. She clutched her phone in her pocket, praying for a signal. Just one bar. That's all she needed. The man hummed tunelessly, fingers tapping the wheel. "Pretty night for a breakdown," he said. "Too casual." Yeah, she muttered, thumb brushing her screen. One bar flickered to life. Her pulse skyrocketed. She dialed 911, shoved the phone into her pocket, heart hammering against her ribs. Click, a dispatcher's voice, tinny and distant. 911, what's your emergency? Brittany froze. The man's eyes slid to her. Quiet type, huh? He chuckled. I like that. Her breath hitched. The tarp in the truck bed shifted. A pale hand slipped free. Lifeless fingers grazed the seat. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" the dispatcher pressed. Brittany's scream lodged in her throat. The man's grin widened. He veered onto a dirt road, trees closing in like a cage. "Gas station's right here," he sneered, parking beside a dilapidated barn. "Let's chat." She bolted. Branches lashed her face as she crashed through the woods, his laughter hunting her. "Run, rabbit!" She stumbled, knees splitting against the rocks. The truck's headlights pinned her like a moth to a board. He emerged, swinging a tire iron. "Please," she begged. Crack. Darkness. Cold metal bit her wrists. Brittany woke gagged, duct tape searing her lips. The truck bed jolted beneath her, the tarp reeking of blood and something sour. Her phone glowed faintly in her pocket, still connected. 45 minutes. They were listening. They'd come. The cab radio crackled. APB for a white pickup, suspect in the Silverwood abductions. The man snarled, killing the radio. He pulled over, yanking the tarp aside. A flashlight seared her eyes. "Know what this is?" He dangled a bone-handled knife in front of her. "Trophy from my first, college girl like you. Screamed real pretty." Brittany thrashed. He backhanded her, stars exploding in her vision. "Shh, we've got time." He drove, hours, days, time blurred. The truck stopped again, voices outside. "License and registration, sir." "Police." Brittany screamed into the gag, writhing. The man laughed softly. "Easy, darling, just a routine stop." But the cop's flashlight swept the truck bed. The tarp slipped. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Chaos shouting, the man lunged for the knife, gunshots. Hands freed her. "We heard everything," an officer murmured. "The call, God, we tracked you for miles." At the station, they told her. 6 women, missing, teeth strung on a necklace in his glove box, Polaroids of trophies taped under the seat, the barn, a charnel house of tools and shallow graves. "He's been hunting this highway for years," the detective said. "You're the first he didn't finish." Brittany stared at her hands, still smelling bleach. First, But not the last, because as they led him to the squad car, he turned, smiled, and whispered, "Rabbit." The news called her a hero. The 911 recording went viral. Gasps, the knife clattering, his confession. But at night, she hears tires on gravel, sees his smile in the dark, and Daniel's texts unanswered. "You there? Please answer." She never will, because Highway 87 doesn't let go, and neither does he. If you dared to travel the cursed stretch of Highway 87, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales that will haunt your dreams. And remember, some roads don't just lead to the unknown, they lead to him. The next time you take a shortcut, listen closely. Do you hear the engine growling behind you?
Next story.
The quiet hum of suburban life was the soundtrack to Katelyn's existence. Maplewood Drive was the kind of street where nothing ever happened. A place where the most exciting event of the week was the arrival of the recycling truck. The houses stood in neat rows, their manicured lawns glowing under the amber streetlights. Katelyn had lived there for 3 years, and in that time, she had grown accustomed to the rhythm of it all. The distant bark of a dog, the occasional whir of a lawnmower, the faint scent of barbecue drifting through the air on summer evenings. It was predictable, safe, and utterly unremarkable, until it wasn't. It began on a Thursday. Katelyn had been walking home from the park, her sneakers crunching against the gravel path that cut through the woods behind her house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. She liked this time of day, the way the world seemed to slow down, the way the light turned everything golden. She was lost in thought, her mind wandering as she often did, when she heard it, a sharp metallic clang like the sound of a trash can lid being dropped. It came from the direction of the Andersons' house, just 2 doors down from hers. She paused, her ears straining, but the sound didn't come again. She shrugged it off and kept walking. But as she passed the Andersons' house, something caught her eye. The front door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see a sliver of darkness. That was odd. Mrs. Anderson was meticulous about keeping her doors locked. She had said so herself more than once during neighborhood watch meetings. Katelyn hesitated, her footsteps slowing. She told herself it was none of her business, that she should keep walking, but something, some instinct, some faint prickle of unease made her stop. She turned and walked up the driveway, her heart beating a little faster. The door creaked as she pushed it open. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Anderson? Is everything okay?" There was no answer. The house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive. Katelyn stepped inside, her sneakers squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. The living room was immaculate as always, but there was something off about it. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. A vase of flowers on the coffee table was tipped over, water pooling on the surface. A magazine lay open on the couch, its pages crumpled as if someone had gripped it tightly. And then she saw it, a single drop of blood on the floor, dark and glistening. Her breath caught in her throat. She told herself it could be anything, a cut, a nosebleed. But deep down she knew something was very wrong. She took a step forward, then another, her eyes scanning the room. The kitchen was to her left, the door half closed. She pushed it open, her hand trembling, and that's when she saw him. Mr. Anderson was lying on the floor, his face pale and lifeless, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. There was a knife sticking out of his chest, the handle slick with blood. Katelyn's stomach lurched, and she clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. She stumbled backward, her legs giving out beneath her, and landed hard on the floor. Her mind was racing, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She had to call the police. She had to get out of there. She had to... Katelyn. The voice came from behind her, soft and calm, almost gentle. She froze, her blood turning to ice. Slowly she turned her head. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Grayson, her next-door neighbor. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. There was blood on his hands, on his shirt, on his face. He smiled at her, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't have come in," he said. Katelyn's mind went blank. She couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Mr. Grayson took a step toward her, and she scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned and ran, her legs moving on their own, and burst out of the house. She didn't stop running until she reached her own front door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the lock. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, gasping for air. She was safe. She was home. But as she stood there, her mind racing, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Mr. Grayson had seen her. He knew she had seen him, and he knew where she lived. The next few days were a blur. Katelyn barely slept, jumping at every sound, every creak of the house. She kept the curtains drawn, the doors locked, the lights off. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That she had seen Mr. Grayson kill Mr. Anderson? She had no proof, no evidence. And even if she did, what would stop him from coming after her? He knew where she lived. He knew her routine. He knew everything. The first sign that he was watching her came on Sunday evening. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she heard a faint tapping on the window. She froze, her heart in her throat, and slowly turned around. There was nothing there, just the darkness outside, the faint reflection of her own face in the glass. She told herself it was just the wind, just her imagination, but deep down she knew. He was out there. He was watching. The next day, she found a note in her mailbox. It was written in neat, precise handwriting, the kind you might see on a birthday card. "I know you saw me," it read. "Let's keep this between us, okay?" There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She knew who it was from. The days turned into weeks, and the torment only grew worse. Katelyn started seeing him everywhere, standing on the corner, sitting in his car, walking past her house. He never said anything, never did anything, but his presence was constant, suffocating. She stopped going outside, stopped answering the phone, stopped living. She was a prisoner in her own home, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And then one night, it all came to a head. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch, when she heard a noise from the backyard. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A soft crunch of gravel, the rustle of leaves. She sat up, her heart pounding, and listened. There it was again. Someone was out there. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. The operator answered, but before Katelyn could say anything, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The creak of the back door opening. She dropped the phone and ran, her mind screaming at her to move, to hide, to do something. She dashed up the stairs and into her bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She locked it, her hands fumbling with the bolt, and then she heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs. She looked around the room, her mind racing. There was no way out, no window, no balcony, nothing. She was trapped. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside her door. There was a moment of silence. and then the doorknob began to turn. Katelyn backed away, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The door creaked open, and there he was, Mr. Grayson, standing in the doorway, his eyes cold and empty. He smiled at her, that same chilling smile, and took a step forward. "You shouldn't have run," he said. Catherine's mind went blank. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy glass vase, and hurled it at him with all her strength. It hit him square in the face, and he stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose. She didn't wait to see what happened next. She bolted past him, down the stairs, and out the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't stop running until she reached the park, her legs giving out beneath her. She collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, her mind reeling. She was alive. She had escaped. But as she sat there, her body trembling, she realized something that made her blood run cold. She had left her phone behind, and with it, her only connection to the outside world. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. Katelyn stayed hidden in the park, her eyes darting around, her ears straining for any sound. She didn't know if Mr. Grayson was still out there, still looking for her, but she couldn't take the chance. She had to stay hidden, stay quiet, stay alive. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Katelyn finally allowed herself to breathe. She was exhausted, her body aching, her mind numb, but she was alive. She had survived the night, but as she stood up, her legs trembling, she realized something that made her stomach churn. She couldn't go back. Not to her house, not to her life, not to anything. Mr. Grayson was still out there, and he would never stop looking for her. Katelyn stumbled into the police station, her face pale and her hands trembling as she recounted everything she had seen. The officers listened carefully, their expressions shifting from concern to skepticism as she described the blood, the knife, and Mr. Grayson's chilling smile. They searched the Andersons' house but found nothing. No body, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The vase of flowers stood upright, the magazine neatly folded on the couch. It was as if the scene had never existed. Mr. Grayson had an alibi, and without evidence, the police dismissed Kathlyn's story as the product of an overactive imagination. Days later, Mr. Anderson was declared missing, presumed to have left on his own. Kathlyn's heart sank as she realized no one believed her. No one except Mr. Grayson, who now knew she was alone and defenseless. She moved away, changed her name, tried to start over, but no matter how far she ran, she could never escape the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. And every night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she would ever truly be safe, or if one day the nightmare would find her again. If you enjoyed this bone-chilling tale of terror, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories that will haunt your dreams. And remember, the quiet neighbor next door might not be as ordinary as they seem. Shadows linger where you least expect them, and trust can be the deadliest mistake of all.
Next story.
The night was unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Jennifer had been planning this escape for weeks. Her parents, strict and overprotective, had always been adamant about her curfew. No late-night outings, no parties, no exceptions. But tonight was different. Tonight she was determined to break free, even if just for a few hours. The party at her friend's house was the talk of the school, and she wasn't going to miss it. She had waited until her parents were asleep, their rhythmic breathing echoing through the quiet house, before she slipped out of her bedroom window. her heart pounding in her chest. The cool night air hit her face as she landed softly on the grass below. She paused for a moment, listening for any signs that her parents had heard her. But the house remained silent, shrouded in darkness. She took a deep breath and started walking, her sneakers barely making a sound on the pavement. The streets were deserted, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp that cast long, eerie shadows on the ground. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping up her spine. She was about halfway to her friend's house when she first noticed it, a faint sound like the low rumble of an engine coming from behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the headlights of a vehicle in the distance. It was an old white van, its paint chipped and rusted in places. She quickened her pace, telling herself that it was just a coincidence, that the van wasn't following her. But the sound of the engine grew louder, closer. Her heart began to race, and she could feel the panic rising in her chest. She turned another corner, hoping to lose the van, but it was still there, its headlights now blindingly bright. Jennifer's mind raced. She couldn't go home. Her parents would kill her if they found out she had snuck out. She couldn't go to the party. It was still too far away. She needed to find a place to hide, somewhere the van couldn't follow. She spotted a row of parked cars up ahead and darted behind one, crouching down and pressing herself against the cold metal. She held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the driver of the van could hear it. The van slowed down and came to a stop right in front of the car she was hiding behind. The engine idled for a moment, and then the driver's side door creaked open. Jennifer's blood ran cold as she saw a man step out of the van. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face that looked almost skeletal in the dim light. His hair was greasy and unkempt, and his clothes were dirty and torn. But it was his eyes that terrified her the most. They were dark and hollow, like two black pits that seemed to stare right through her. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, and Jennifer knew she had to run. She bolted from behind the car, her legs pumping as fast as they could. She could hear the man shouting behind her, his voice harsh and guttural. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just ran, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She turned down a narrow alley, hoping to lose him, but the sound of his footsteps was still close behind. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. She needed to find a place to hide, somewhere he couldn't find her. She spotted a park up ahead, its gates slightly ajar. She darted inside, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of help. But the park was empty, the swings creaking softly in the breeze. She ran towards the trees, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the man's footsteps behind her, getting closer with every second. She ducked behind a large oak tree, pressing herself against the rough bark and trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the man's breathing now, heavy and labored, as he searched for her. Jennifer closed her eyes, praying that he would go away. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't dare make a sound. She could hear him moving through the trees, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. He was so close now, so close that she could almost feel his breath on her skin. She held her breath, her body trembling with fear. And then, just when she thought he was going to find her, she heard a loud crash from the other side of the park. The man's head snapped towards the sound, and he hesitated for a moment before turning and running towards it. Jennifer didn't waste any time. She bolted from her hiding spot and ran towards the park's exit, her legs burning with the effort. She could hear the man shouting behind her, but she didn't stop. She ran until her lungs felt like they were on fire, until she finally reached the safety of her friend's house. She collapsed on the doorstep, her body shaking with sobs. Her friend opened the door, her eyes wide with shock as she took in Jennifer's disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" she asked, pulling Jennifer inside. Jennifer could barely speak, her voice choked with tears. "There was a man. He was following me. He almost caught me." Her friend's face paled and she quickly locked the door behind them. "You're safe now," she said, wrapping her arms around Jennifer. "You're safe." But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She knew that the man was still out there, still searching for her, and she couldn't help but wonder if he would find her again. The party was in full swing, the music pounding through the walls and the air thick with the smell of sweat and alcohol. Jennifer tried to lose herself in the crowd, to forget about the man and the terror she had just experienced. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. "We should call the cops," her friend whispered. Jennifer shook her head violently. No cops. My parents, they can't know I was out." Her friend hesitated, but in the end she relented. "All right, we'll take you home." The car ride was silent, except for the sound of Jennifer's ragged breathing. Every passing streetlight cast shifting shadows against the window, and each one sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Was that him on the sidewalk? Was that van up ahead the same one? By the time they pulled up to her house, her stomach was in knots. "You sure you'll be okay?" her friend asked. Jennifer nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "Yeah, thanks." She crept up the front lawn, her ears straining for any sound. The house was dark, still, just as she had left it. With careful, practiced movements, she climbed back up to her window and slipped inside. She stood there for a moment, heart hammering, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Everything was normal, except it wasn't. She moved to lock her window, then froze. There, on her nightstand, sat something that hadn't been there before. A small folded piece of paper. Her blood turned to ice. Hands shaking, she picked it up and slowly unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged, uneven handwriting were 4 words. "I know where you sleep." A sharp gasp caught in her throat. Her entire body went rigid. The window had been locked when she left. The house had been locked. He had been inside. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, the note still clutched in her trembling fingers. She had made it home, but she was far from safe. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying stories that will haunt your nights. And remember, just because you've locked the doors, drawn the curtains, and hidden under the covers, doesn't mean you're alone. Some things don't need an invitation to step inside. Sleep well, if you dare.
Next story.
Penelope had always dreamed of living in a quiet, safe neighborhood. After years of bouncing between cramped apartments in the city, she finally found the perfect place. A charming little house on Elm Street in the quaint town of Hillsboro, Texas. The street was lined with towering oak trees, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the pavement. The houses were modest but well kept, with neatly trimmed lawns and flower beds bursting with color. It was the kind of place where people waved to each other from their porches and left their doors unlocked at night. At least, that's what Penelope thought. The first few days were idyllic. She spent her mornings sipping coffee on the front porch, listening to the birds chirp and the distant hum of lawnmowers. Her neighbors seemed friendly enough. An elderly couple across the street, a young family with 2 kids next door, and a quiet older man named Mr. Grayson who lived alone in the house to her right. He was polite but reserved, always offering a curt nod or a brief smile when they crossed paths. Penelope didn't think much of him at first. He seemed harmless, just another retiree enjoying his golden years. But then the noises started. It was subtle at first, a faint scratching sound late at night, like nails dragging across wood. Penelope would lie in bed, her heart pounding as she strained to listen. The sound would come and go, always just loud enough to pull her from the edge of sleep. She told herself it was just the house settling, or maybe a branch scraping against the window. But deep down, she knew it was something else. Then came the whispers. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but they were there. Soft, muffled voices drifting through the walls, too indistinct to make out any words. Penelope would press her ear against the wall, her breath shallow, trying to decipher the source. But the whispers always stopped as suddenly as they started, leaving her in silence once more. The final straw was the scream. It happened on a Thursday night, just as Penelope was about to fall asleep. A piercing, blood-curdling scream tore through the stillness, so loud and raw that it felt like it was coming from inside her own head. She bolted upright, her heart racing, her body frozen in terror. The scream was followed by a series of muffled sobs, then silence. Penelope sat there for what felt like hours, clutching her blanket, her mind racing. It had to be coming from Mr. Grayson's house. There was no doubt about it. The next morning, she tried to convince herself it was just a nightmare, but the memory of that scream lingered, haunting her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights flickered on, Penelope made a decision. She was going to find out what was happening next door. She waited until the dead of night, when the neighborhood was cloaked in darkness, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Slipping on a dark hoodie and a pair of sneakers, she crept out of her house and into the shadows. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached Mr. Grayson's house, her footsteps soft and deliberate. The house loomed before her, its windows dark and lifeless. Penelope hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But she couldn't. She had to know. Moving around to the side of the house, she found a basement window partially obscured by overgrown bushes. Crouching down, she peered inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The basement was dimly lit, the flickering glow of a single bulb casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with tools and boxes, but it was what was in the center of the room that made Penelope's stomach churn. A metal table, stained with dark, rust-colored patches, chains hanging from the ceiling, and in the corner, a figure, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. She was gagged, her wrists bound with rope, her body trembling as she stared at something Penelope couldn't see. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stay there. But she couldn't look away. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every horrifying detail. There were more women, at least 3 of them, huddled together in a makeshift cage. Their faces were hollow, their eyes vacant, as if they had long since given up hope. And then she saw him. Mr. Grayson stood in the shadows, his back to the window. He was holding something, a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. He was muttering to himself, his voice low and guttural, the words unintelligible but dripping with malice. Penelope's stomach turned as she realized what she was witnessing. This wasn't just a crime, it was a nightmare. She had to get out of there. She had to call the police. But as she started to back away, her foot caught on a loose stone, sending it skittering across the ground. The sound was deafening in the silence. Mr. Grayson froze, his head snapping toward the window. Penelope's heart stopped as their eyes met. For a moment, time stood still. Then Mr. Grayson's face twisted into a grotesque smile and he lunged toward the window. Penelope didn't think, she ran. Her legs moved on their own, propelling her through the darkness as fast as they could carry her. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and relentless, his breath ragged and guttural. She didn't dare look back. She just ran, her lungs burning, her vision blurring with tears. She reached her house and fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. Finally, the door swung open and she stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. She locked it, then bolted it, then pushed a chair against it for good measure. Her chest heaved as she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. The sound of footsteps outside made her freeze. They were slow, deliberate, circling the house. Then they stopped. Penelope held her breath, her eyes fixed on the door. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but silence. And then a single soft knock. Penelope's blood turned to ice. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob, her eyes wide with terror. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice, low, calm, and dripping with menace. "I know you're in there, Penelope." She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just sat there, paralyzed with fear, as the footsteps retreated into the night. The police arrived the next morning, but by then, Mr. Grayson was gone. The basement was empty, the women nowhere to be found. All that remained were the chains, the bloodstains, and the lingering sense of dread that seemed to seep into the very walls of the house. Penelope moved out that same day, leaving behind everything she couldn't carry. She never went back to Hillsboro, Texas. But even now, years later, she still hears the whispers. She still sees his face in her dreams. And she still wonders if he's out there, waiting, watching, searching for his next victim. If you enjoyed this chilling tale of terror, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more spine-tingling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And remember, the quietest neighborhoods often hide the darkest secrets. You never know what's lurking behind the door next door, or who might be watching from the shadows.
Next story.
Stella had always been a night owl. She loved the quiet of the late hours, the way the world seemed to hold its breath when the clock struck midnight. It was during one of these sleepless nights that she first noticed something off. She had been scrolling through her phone, the blue light casting eerie shadows on her bedroom walls, when she heard it, a faint creak like the sound of a floorboard shifting under someone's weight. She froze, her thumb hovering over the screen. The house was empty, save for her. She lived alone, had for years, but the sound was unmistakable. She held her breath, listening, but the noise didn't come again. Shaking it off as her imagination, she tweeted about it. "Just heard a creepy noise in my empty house. Probably nothing, but anyone else ever feel like they're not really alone?" She added a laughing emoji to downplay it, but the unease lingered. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of replies. Some people shared their own spooky experiences, while others joked about ghosts. One reply stood out, though. A user with no profile picture and a string of random numbers for a username had commented, "You're not alone. I'm here." Stella frowned. It was probably just a troll, but something about the message made her skin crawl. She deleted the comment and tried to forget about it. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. A few nights later, she was sitting at her desk, editing a video for her YouTube channel, when she felt it. A cold breath on the back of her neck. She whipped around, her heart pounding, but there was no one there. The room was empty. She tweeted about it again, this time with a little more urgency. "Okay, this is getting weird. I just felt someone breathing on me, but I'm alone in my house. Am I losing it?" The replies flooded in, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But the same anonymous user commented again, "I told you I'm here." Stella's unease grew. She started noticing small things. A shadow moving outside her window when she knew no one was there. The faint sound of footsteps in the hallway when she was home alone. The way her cat would stare at the corner of the room, his fur bristling, as if he saw something she couldn't. She tweeted about it all, her followers growing with each new post. People were hooked, drawn in by the eerie mystery of it all. But Stella wasn't looking for fame. She was looking for answers. One night, she decided to set up a camera in her living room, hoping to catch something, anything, that would prove she wasn't going crazy. She left it recording while she slept, and the next morning she reviewed the footage. At first, there was nothing. Just the empty room, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. But then, at 3:17 a.m., something moved. A shadow, darker than the rest, slid across the wall. It lingered for a moment, then vanished. Stella's breath caught in her throat. She rewound the footage, watching it again and again. It was real. She wasn't imagining it. She tweeted the video, her hands trembling as she typed. "I caught something on camera last night. I don't know what it is, but it's not my imagination. Please, someone tell me I'm not crazy." The response was overwhelming. Her tweet went viral, thousands of people sharing their theories, ghosts, intruders, even government surveillance. But amidst the chaos, one reply stood out. The same anonymous user, "You're not crazy, but you're not safe either." Stella's heart raced. She tried to reply, to ask what they meant, but the account was gone, deleted. She felt a chill run down her spine. The next few days were a blur. Stella started noticing more things. A figure standing at the edge of her yard, watching her from the shadows. The sound of someone whispering her name when she was alone. The way her phone would light up with notifications from unknown numbers. Messages that simply read, "I'm watching." She tried to tell her friends, her family, but they brushed it off. "You're just stressed," they said. "It's all in your head." But Stella knew better. She could feel it, the weight of someone's gaze, the presence of someone who shouldn't be there. One night, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She set up multiple cameras around her house, determined to catch whoever or whatever was tormenting her. She stayed up late, watching the live feeds, her heart pounding with every flicker of movement. Hours passed, and nothing happened. She was about to give up when she saw it, a figure, cloaked in darkness, standing in her backyard. It was too far away to make out any details, but she could see its eyes, glinting in the moonlight. She grabbed her phone, her hand shaking as she dialed 911. But before she could hit call, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Stella froze, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could hear it now, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and backed into a corner, her eyes darting around the room. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, low and menacing, whispered, "I'm here." Stella screamed, dropping the knife as she bolted for the door. She fumbled with the lock, her hands slick with sweat, and finally managed to wrench it open. She ran into the night, barefoot and trembling, not stopping until she reached her neighbor's house. She pounded on the door, sobbing, until they let her in. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the intruder was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. They told her it was probably a prank, a figment of her imagination, but Stella knew the truth. The next day, she tweeted one last time, "I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm not going to let you win. I'm not going to live in fear." Her followers rallied behind her, offering support and advice. But Stella didn't feel safe. She started carrying pepper spray, installed new locks on her doors, and even bought a guard dog. But no matter what she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Weeks passed, and the strange occurrences seemed to stop. Stella began to relax, to think that maybe it was over. But then one night she woke up to the sound of her dog growling. She sat up, her heart racing, and saw it, a figure standing at the foot of her bed. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer, its breath hot against her face, and whispered, "I told you, I'm here." Stella's final tweet was posted the next morning. It was a single sentence, cryptic and chilling. "He's in the house." Her followers were frantic, flooding her mentions with messages of concern. But Stella never replied. Her phone was found in her living room, the screen cracked and smeared with blood. The house was empty, the doors and windows locked from the inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of an intruder. Stella was gone, vanished without a trace. To this day, no one knows what happened to her. Some say she was the victim of a stalker, a predator who used her tweets to track her every move. Others believe she was targeted by something otherworldly. But one thing is certain, Stella's story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. If you enjoyed this chilling tale of Stella's haunting descent into terror, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. And remember, the shadows are always closer than they appear, and you're never truly alone.
Next story.
It was a cold, moonless night when Lucy, Grace, and Henry decided to explore the abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had stood there for over a century, its crumbling facade and overgrown gardens a testament to its long-forgotten grandeur. The locals whispered about the place, warning of curses, disappearances, and strange lights flickering in the windows at night. But to the three friends, it was just another adventure, a way to break the monotony of their small-town lives. Lucy, the boldest of the trio, had always been fascinated by the macabre. She was the one who suggested they explore the mansion, her voice tinged with excitement as she described the eerie beauty of the decaying structure. Grace, ever the cautious one, hesitated. She had heard the stories, the warnings, and something about the mansion made her skin crawl. But Henry, always eager to impress Lucy, quickly agreed, and Grace reluctantly followed. As they approached the mansion, the air grew colder, and the silence of the night was broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The mansion loomed before them, its broken windows like empty eye sockets staring into the void. The front door, hanging precariously on its hinges, creaked as Lucy pushed it open. The smell of damp wood and decay filled their nostrils, and for a moment, They all hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Grace whispered, her voice trembling. Lucy grinned, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Come on, Grace. Where's your sense of adventure?" Henry chuckled nervously, but he followed Lucy inside, Grace trailing behind. The interior of the mansion was even more unsettling than the outside. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air. They moved cautiously through the rooms, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The mansion seemed to breathe, the creaks and groans of the old wood creating an eerie symphony. Grace's heart pounded in her chest, and she clutched Henry's arm tightly. Lucy, however, seemed unfazed, her curiosity driving her deeper into the mansion. As they reached the second floor, they heard it, a low, guttural chanting coming from somewhere deep within the house. The sound was faint, but it sent a chill down their spines. Lucy's eyes widened with excitement, and she motioned for them to follow. Grace shook her head, her fear palpable, but Henry nodded, his curiosity piqued. They followed the sound, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and they could feel the vibrations in the air. It was coming from behind a heavy, ornate door at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint, flickering light spilled out from the crack. Lucy reached for the door, but Grace grabbed her arm. "Lucy, don't! This is a bad idea." Lucy shook her off, her determination unwavering. "We've come this far, we can't turn back now." She pushed the door open, and what they saw inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The room was large, with high ceilings and walls adorned with strange, arcane symbols. In the center of the room stood a circle of hooded figures, their faces obscured by shadows. They were chanting in a language that none of the friends could understand, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. In the center of the circle was an altar, and on it lay a young woman, her body pale and lifeless. The friends froze, their breath caught in their throats. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. The hooded figures turned towards the door, their chanting faltering as they noticed the intruders. For a moment time seemed to stand still, then chaos erupted. The hooded figures moved with unnatural speed, their robes billowing as they lunged towards the door. Lucy screamed, and the three friends turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. The mansion seemed to come alive around them, the walls closing in, the floorboards twisting and warping beneath their feet. They ran blindly, their flashlights casting frantic beams of light as they tried to find their way back to the entrance. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and they could hear the footsteps of their pursuers close behind. Grace stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully, but Henry grabbed her arm and pulled her to her feet. "We have to keep moving," he shouted, his voice filled with panic. Lucy was ahead of them, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she ran. But as they reached the staircase, she stopped, her eyes wide with terror. The hooded figures were already there, blocking their path. They turned and ran in the opposite direction, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They found themselves in a narrow hallway, the walls lined with doors. Lucy grabbed the handle of the nearest door and yanked it open, revealing a small, dusty room. They piled inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The room was dark, the only light coming from their flashlights. They could hear the hooded figures outside, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Grace was sobbing, her hands pressed to her mouth to stifle the sound. Henry was trembling, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Lucy, however, was eerily calm. She moved to the far wall, her flashlight beam illuminating a small hidden door. "This way," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They crawled through the door, finding themselves in a narrow, dark passage. The air was damp and cold, and the walls were close, pressing in on them from all sides. They moved as quickly as they could, their hands brushing against the rough stone. The passage seemed to go on forever, but finally they saw a faint light ahead. They emerged into the woods, the cold night air a relief after the claustrophobic passage. But their relief was short-lived. The hooded figures were still behind them, their chanting growing louder as they closed in. The friends ran through the woods, their feet slipping on the wet leaves. The trees seemed to twist and turn, the path ahead unclear. Grace stumbled again, and this time she couldn't get up. Henry turned back to help her, but Lucy grabbed his arm. "We have to leave her," Lucy hissed, her eyes wild with fear. Henry hesitated, torn between his loyalty to Grace and his own survival. But before he could make a decision, the hooded figures were upon them. Grace screamed as they dragged her away, her cries echoing through the woods. Henry and Lucy ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could hear Grace's screams growing fainter, and the guilt was almost too much to bear. But they couldn't stop, couldn't look back. They had to survive. Finally, they reached the edge of the woods, the lights of the town visible in the distance. They collapsed on the ground, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. They were safe, for now. But as they looked back at the woods, they knew that they would never be truly free. The memory of that night, of the hooded figures and Grace's screams, would haunt them forever. Henry and Lucy reported the incident to the police. They described the mansion, the hooded figures, and Grace's abduction in vivid detail. The police launched an investigation, but the mansion was empty when they arrived. There was no sign of the cult, no trace of Grace, and no evidence of the horrific ritual they had witnessed. The case grew cold, and Grace was never found. The police eventually closed the investigation, chalking it up to a tragic disappearance. But Henry and Lucy knew the truth. They knew that Grace had been taken by the cult, and that she was likely dead, or worse. Years passed, and life moved on. Henry and Lucy drifted apart, the trauma of that night driving a wedge between them. Lucy became increasingly withdrawn, her once bold spirit crushed by the weight of what they had seen. She rarely spoke of that night, but when she did, her voice was filled with a deep, unshakable fear. Then one night, Henry was browsing the dark web, as he often did. He had developed a morbid fascination with the darker corners of the internet, perhaps as a way to cope with the horrors he had witnessed. That night he stumbled upon a red room, a live-streamed event where unspeakable acts were performed for an audience of depraved individuals. At first, Henry couldn't believe what he was seeing. The stream was grainy, the audio distorted, but there was no mistaking the figure on the screen. It was Lucy. She was alive, but barely. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and lifeless. The hooded figures from the mansion surrounded her, their chants echoing through the stream as they performed unspeakable acts of cruelty. Henry's heart raced as he watched, his hands trembling as he tried to process what he was seeing. He quickly reported the stream to the authorities, providing them with all the information he could. But by the time the police traced the stream, it was gone. The red room had vanished, leaving no trace of Lucy or the cult. The police launched another investigation, but once again, they came up empty-handed. The cult was like a ghost, slipping through their fingers every time they got close. Lucy was never found, and the case was once again closed. Henry was left with nothing but the memory of that night and the haunting image of Lucy on the screen. The mansion still stands, a silent sentinel on the outskirts of town. Its dark secrets remain hidden, its walls holding the echoes of the horrors that took place within, and those who dare to venture inside may never return. But for Henry, the real horror lies not in the mansion, but in the knowledge that the cult is still out there, watching, waiting, and hunting. And he knows that one day they will come for him. If this tale of terror left you on edge, make sure to subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss a journey into the unknown. But before you go, remember, some doors are better left unopened, and some secrets are better left buried. The world is darker than you think, and not everything that hides in the shadows is meant to be found.
Next story.
The night was thick with an eerie stillness, the kind that makes your skin crawl even before anything happens. Tina had been driving for hours, her eyes heavy, her mind foggy from the endless stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The radio had long since faded into static, and the only sound was the hum of her car's engine and the occasional whoosh of passing headlights. She was alone, and the isolation was starting to weigh on her. The kind of isolation that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. She had been traveling to visit her sister in a small town a few states over. It was a trip she had made before, but never this late at night. The darkness outside her windows felt oppressive, like it was pressing in on her from all sides. Her GPS had stopped working about an hour ago, and she was relying on memory and the occasional road sign to guide her. Her phone had no service, and the map she had printed out was crumpled on the passenger seat, barely legible under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Tina's eyelids were drooping, and she knew she couldn't keep going like this. She needed a break, even if it was just for a few minutes. Up ahead, she saw the faint glow of a gas station sign, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying firefly. Relief washed over her as she pulled into the nearly empty lot. The gas station was small, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The windows were fogged, and the neon sign above the door buzzed faintly. A single car was parked near the entrance, but there was no one in sight. Tina pulled up to the pump, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. She stepped out of the car, the cool night air biting at her skin. The gas station was surrounded by dense woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels. She glanced around, her unease growing. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them, or the way the wind whispered through the trees like a warning. She filled up her tank, the sound of the gas pumping loud in the stillness. As she replaced the nozzle, she noticed the attendant inside the station. He was an older man, his face partially hidden by the brim of a worn-out baseball cap. He didn't look up as she approached the door, his attention focused on something behind the counter. Tina hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. The inside of the gas station was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The shelves were stocked with dusty cans and bags of chips, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and motor oil. Tina grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels, her eyes darting around the small space. The attendant still hadn't looked up, and she felt a pang of unease. She cleared her throat, and he finally glanced at her, his eyes cold and distant. "Just these," she said, placing the items on the counter. He nodded silently, ringing her up without a word. Tina handed him a few bills, her hand shaking slightly. He took the money, his fingers brushing against hers, and she flinched. His skin was ice cold, and she quickly pulled her hand back, stuffing the change into her pocket. She grabbed her items and hurried out the door, the bell jingling again as it closed behind her. Back in her car, Tina locked the doors and let out a shaky breath. She glanced at the gas station, the windows now dark. The attendant was nowhere to be seen. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease that had settled over her. She was just tired, that was all. She needed to rest, even if it was just for a few minutes. Tina reclined her seat slightly, closing her eyes. The sound of the wind outside was soothing, and she felt herself drifting off. But just as she was about to fall asleep, she heard a faint noise. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make her eyes snap open. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound came again, a faint scratching, like nails against glass. She looked around, her breath catching in her throat. The gas station was completely dark now, the neon sign above the door flickering out. The only light came from the moon, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. Tina's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and she froze. There was something there, just at the edge of the woods, a figure, standing perfectly still, watching her. Her heart raced as she fumbled for the keys, her hands trembling. She turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life. She pressed the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. Panic surged through her as she realized all 4 tires were flat. She looked back at the figure, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It was closer now, and she could see the glint of something in its hand. A chainsaw. Tina's mind raced as she tried to think of what to do. She couldn't stay in the car, but the thought of getting out and running into the woods was terrifying. The figure was moving closer, the chainsaw now raised, its engine roaring to life. The sound was deafening, and Tina's instincts kicked in. She threw open the car door and bolted, her feet pounding against the asphalt as she ran towards the woods. The trees loomed ahead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. Tina plunged into the darkness, the sound of the chainsaw growing louder behind her. She could hear the man's heavy footsteps, his breathing ragged as he chased her. She didn't look back, her heart pounding in her chest as she ran deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks tripping her as she went. Branches clawed at her face and arms, but she didn't stop. She could hear the man gaining on her, his laughter echoing through the trees. It was a cold, cruel sound that sent chills down her spine. She sobbed as she ran, her legs burning with the effort. Up ahead, she saw a small clearing, the moonlight filtering through the trees. She sprinted towards it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But as she reached the edge of the clearing, she froze. There was another figure there, standing in the shadows. Tina's heart sank as she realized she was trapped. The man with the chainsaw was behind her, and now there was someone in front of her. She turned, her eyes darting around for any way out. The man with the chainsaw was closer now, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. Tina backed away, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with fear. But then, something unexpected happened. The figure in the shadows stepped forward, and Tina realized it was a woman. She was older, her face lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She held a shotgun in her hands, the barrel pointed at the man with the chainsaw. "Get behind me," the woman said, her voice steady. Tina didn't hesitate. She ran to the woman, her legs giving out as she collapsed behind her. The man with the chainsaw stopped, his smile faltering as he looked at the woman. For a moment there was silence, the only sound the distant hum of the chainsaw. "You don't want to do this," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between the woman and Tina. Then, with a growl, he turned and disappeared into the woods, the sound of the chainsaw fading into the distance. Tina sobbed, her body shaking with relief. The woman lowered the shotgun, turning to look at her. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Tina shook her head, unable to speak. The woman helped her to her feet, her grip strong and reassuring. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you out of here." Tina followed the woman through the woods, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. They emerged onto a dirt road where an old pickup truck was parked. The woman helped Tina into the passenger seat, then climbed into the driver's side. As they drove away, Tina glanced back at the woods, her heart still pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the man with the chainsaw was still out there, waiting. But for now, she was safe. And as the woman drove her to safety, Tina couldn't help but wonder who she was and why she had been there in the woods that night. But those were questions for another time. For now, all Tina could do was hold on to the feeling of relief and try to forget the terror that had gripped her just moments before. If you enjoyed this terrifying journey into the unknown, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will haunt your dreams. Remember, the night holds secrets that should never be uncovered, and sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see.
Next story.
The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers and the night into a blur of shadows. Ember sat in her small apartment above the tattoo parlor where she worked, the faint hum of her neon sign casting an eerie glow through the window. She was used to the solitude of her nights, the quiet after the buzz of the tattoo gun faded and the last client left. But tonight, the silence felt heavier, as if the storm outside had seeped into her bones. She had just finished sketching a new design, a twisted skeletal tree with roots that seemed to writhe and curl like fingers reaching for something unseen. It was a piece for a regular client, a man who always requested dark, intricate designs but never spoke much about himself. Ember had always found him a little unsettling, but he tipped well, and his request challenged her skills. Still, something about tonight made her uneasy. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the way he had lingered after his last session, his eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. Ember shook off the feeling and stood, stretching her stiff muscles. She padded to the kitchen, her bare feet cold against the linoleum floor, and poured herself a glass of wine. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. She was about to settle onto the couch with a book when she heard it, a faint knock at the door downstairs. She froze, the glass halfway to her lips. Who would be out in this weather, and at this hour? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Ember set the glass down and crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The street below was empty, save for the occasional car splashing through the puddles. She couldn't see anyone at the door. Her heart began to race. Maybe it was just the wind or a branch tapping against the building. But the knock came a third time, sharp and deliberate. Ember hesitated, then grabbed her phone and made her way downstairs. her pulse pounding in her ears. She flipped on the porch light and peered through the peephole. No one was there. She unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, the cold wind whipping rain into her face. The street was still empty. She stepped out onto the porch, her eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing. Just the storm and the faint glow of the streetlights. She was about to go back inside when she noticed something on the doorstep. A small, crumpled piece of paper, soaked from the rain. Ember picked it up, her fingers trembling. She unfolded it carefully, the ink smudged but still legible. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of her tattoo parlor with a single word scrawled beneath it: soon. Her breath caught in her throat. She crumpled the paper and shoved it into her pocket, her mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? A threat? She locked the door behind her and hurried back upstairs, her heart pounding. She checked every window, every lock, but everything seemed secure. Still, the feeling of unease wouldn't leave her. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Ember tried to distract herself with her book, but the words blurred together, her mind unable to focus. She jumped at every creak of the old building, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. Finally, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. She woke to the sound of glass breaking. Her eyes snapped open, her body rigid with fear. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside. She held her breath, listening. There it was again, the sound of shattering glass coming from downstairs. Ember's mind raced. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. The operator's voice was calm, reassuring, but Ember could barely speak. "Someone's in my shop," she whispered. "I think they're trying to break in." The operator told her to stay where she was, to lock her bedroom door and wait for the police. Ember did as she was told, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the intruder could hear it. She pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sound from below. For a moment there was nothing. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. She backed away from the door, her eyes darting around the room for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. Her tattoo gun was on the desk, but it was useless. She grabbed a pair of scissors instead, clutching them tightly in her hand. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Ember held her breath, her entire body trembling. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. She could see a shadow in the doorway, tall and broad, but the details were obscured by the darkness. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped into the room, and the light from the neon sign caught his face. It was him, the client with the dark tattoos. His eyes locked onto hers, and he smiled, a cold, predatory grin that made her blood run cold. "Hello, Ember," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I've been waiting for this." She didn't think. She just acted. With a scream, she lunged at him, slashing wildly with the scissors. He dodged easily, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until she dropped the weapon. She kicked and thrashed, but he was too strong, pinning her against the wall with one hand while the other reached into his pocket. "Don't worry," he said, pulling out a roll of duct tape. "This won't take long." Ember's mind raced. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't. With a surge of adrenaline, she brought her knee up, catching him in the stomach. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for her to slip free. She bolted for the door, but he was faster, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her back. She screamed again, louder this time, hoping someone would hear her. He slapped a hand over her mouth, his breath hot against her ear. "Shut up," he hissed. "You're only making this harder." She bit down hard on his hand, tasting blood. He cursed, releasing her, and she took off down the stairs, her bare feet slipping on the wet floor. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and fast. She reached the front door and yanked it open, the cold rain hitting her like a slap. She ran, her heart pounding, her lungs burning. The streets were empty, the storm still raging. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him following, his face twisted with rage. She turned a corner, her feet slipping on the wet pavement, and crashed into a dumpster. Pain shot through her side, but she forced herself to keep moving. She ducked into an alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear him getting closer, his footsteps echoing off the walls. She spotted a fire escape and scrambled up, her hands slipping on the wet metal. She reached the top and pulled herself onto the roof, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She crouched behind a ventilation unit, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She heard him below, his footsteps slowing as he searched the alley. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't look up. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of metal creaking as he started to climb the fire escape. Ember's mind raced. She had to do something, anything. She looked around, her eyes landing on a loose brick. She grabbed it, her hands shaking, and waited. She could hear him getting closer, his breathing heavy and labored. As his head appeared over the edge of the roof, she stood and hurled the brick with all her strength. It hit him square in the face, and he let out a grunt of pain, losing his grip and tumbling back down the fire escape. She didn't wait to see if he got up. She took off across the roof, her legs burning with the effort. She reached the other side and looked down. The drop was too far, but she had no choice. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps pounding on the roof. She took a deep breath and jumped, landing hard on the pavement below. Pain shot through her ankles, but she forced herself to keep moving. She ran, her vision blurring with tears until she saw the flashing lights of a police car. She waved her arms, screaming for help. The officers rushed to her side, their voices calm but urgent as they helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" one of them asked, his hand steady on her arm. Ember shook her head, though her body ached and her mind was still reeling. "He's here," she gasped. "He was just here. You have to find him." The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them radioed for backup while the other stayed with her. "Can you describe him?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Ember nodded, her teeth chattering from the cold and the fear. "He's tall, broad shoulders. He's one of my clients. He has tattoos, dark, intricate designs. He's dangerous. Please, you have to find him." The officer nodded, his expression grim. "We'll search the area. Stay here with my partner." Ember watched as he drew his flashlight and began sweeping the alley, his movements careful and deliberate. She wanted to feel relief, but the fear was still there, gnawing at her insides. He was still out there. She could feel it. The second officer led her to the patrol car, helping her into the back seat. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," he said, his voice gentle. "But we need you to stay here while we search for him. Can you do that?" Ember nodded, though every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but sit still. She watched through the rain-streaked window as more police cars arrived, their lights casting eerie shadows on the walls of the alley. Officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for the intruder. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Ember's mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if they didn't find him. What if he was still watching her? What if he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Suddenly there was a shout, a sharp, urgent cry that made Ember's blood run cold. She leaned forward, straining to see through the rain. One of the officers was running toward the patrol car, his face pale. "We found something," he said, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Ember's stomach dropped. She stepped out of the car, her legs trembling as she followed the officer back into the alley. They stopped near the dumpster where she had hidden, and the officer shone his flashlight on the ground. There, scrawled in the wet pavement, was a message. "I'll be seeing you soon, Ember." Her breath caught in her throat. He had been here, right under their noses, and they hadn't even realized it. The officers exchanged grim looks, their expressions hardening. "We're not leaving you alone," one of them said firmly. "We'll take you to the station, get a statement, and make sure you're safe." Ember nodded, though the fear was still there, clawing at her chest. As they led her back to the car, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching her, waiting for his next opportunity. And as the patrol car pulled away, she glanced out the window one last time. In the shadows of the alley, she thought she saw a figure standing there, his face obscured but his presence unmistakable. He raised a hand as if in farewell, and then disappeared into the darkness. Ember's heart sank. This wasn't over, not even close. If you enjoyed Ember's harrowing tale of survival, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And remember, the next time you hear a knock at your door late at night, or feel the unsettling prickle of being watched, don't ignore it. Some dangers are closer than they appear.
Next story.
The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. Taylor sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They were trembling, though she couldn't remember why. Her nails were caked with dirt, and there was a faint smear of something dark, rusty almost, underneath her index finger. She rubbed at it, but it wouldn't come off. Her throat tightened as she glanced at the clock. 3:47 a.m. She had no memory of how she'd gotten here. No memory of the last few hours at all. This wasn't the first time. Over the past few weeks, Taylor had been waking up in strange places. Places she didn't remember going to. Once, she'd found herself standing in the middle of her kitchen, clutching a knife, the blade glinting in the moonlight. Another time, she'd woken up in her car, parked in an empty lot on the outskirts of town, her clothes damp with sweat and her hair tangled with leaves. Each time the same feeling, a deep, gnawing dread that settled in her chest and refused to leave. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and hollow-eyed. There was a scratch on her cheek, fresh and angry looking. She touched it gingerly, wincing at the sting. "What's happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The silence swallowed her words, offering no answers. The next morning, Taylor tried to shake off the unease that clung to her like a second skin. She went through the motions of her day, work, errands, a quick coffee with a friend, but her mind kept drifting back to the night before. The dirt under her nails, the scratch on her face, the way her heart had raced when she'd realized she didn't know where she'd been or what she'd done. That evening, she decided to take precautions. She locked her bedroom door and placed a chair under the handle, just in case. She even set up her phone to record herself overnight, hoping to catch whatever was happening on camera. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she told herself it would be fine. She just needed to see what was going on. Then she could fix it. Sleep came slowly, dragging her under like a riptide. When she woke up, the first thing she noticed was the smell, metallic, coppery, like pennies. Her stomach churned as she sat up, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She wasn't in her bedroom. She was in a basement, cold and damp, the walls lined with shelves cluttered with tools and boxes. Her hands were sticky, and when she looked down, she saw they were covered in blood. Panic surged through her, sharp and electric. She scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. There was a body on the floor, crumpled and still. A man. His face was turned away from her, but she could see the dark pool of blood spreading beneath him. Her blood. His blood. She didn't know. She didn't know. "No, no, no," she whispered, backing away. Her foot caught on something, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. Her hands landed in the blood, warm and slick. She gagged, bile rising in her throat. What had she done? What had she done? She didn't remember running, but suddenly she was outside, the cold night air biting at her skin. She was still in her pajamas, her feet bare and cut from the gravel. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Away from the basement. Away from the body. Away from herself. The days that followed were a blur. Taylor tried to convince herself it was a nightmare, a hallucination, anything but real. But the blood under her nails wouldn't wash away, and the scratch on her cheek was still there, a constant reminder. She avoided the news, terrified of what she might see. She stopped sleeping, too afraid of what might happen if she closed her eyes. But exhaustion eventually won out. One night she fell asleep on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. When she woke up, she was in the woods, the trees looming around her like silent sentinels. Her hands were clean this time, but her clothes were torn, and there was a deep ache in her muscles, as if she'd been running for hours. She stumbled through the trees, her breath fogging in the cold air, until she found a road. A passing driver took pity on her and brought her back to town. The police came to her door the next day. They asked her questions. Where had she been last night? Had she seen anything unusual? Did she know a man named Daniel Harris? She shook her head, her heart pounding. Daniel Harris. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. The officers left, but their eyes lingered on her, suspicious and calculating. Taylor's paranoia grew. She started noticing things. Strange looks from her neighbors, a car that seemed to follow her on her way to work. She began to piece together fragments of memories, flashes of things she couldn't explain. A knife, a scream, the sound of footsteps chasing her through the dark. She felt like she was losing her mind, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. One night, she decided to confront it. She set up cameras around her house, determined to catch herself in the act. She locked all the doors and windows, barricaded herself in her bedroom, and waited. Sleep came reluctantly, dragging her under despite her fear. When she woke up, the cameras were off, all of them. The barricade was still in place, but her hands were bruised, her knuckles raw and bleeding. She checked the footage, her heart in her throat. The last thing the cameras recorded was her standing in the living room, staring directly into the lens with a blank, empty expression. Then the screen went black. The final straw came when she found a box in her closet. It was small and unassuming, tucked away behind a stack of old clothes. Inside was a collection of items, a watch, a wallet, a wedding ring. None of them were hers. At the bottom of the box was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline made her blood run cold. Local man missing. Police suspect foul play. The article was about Daniel Harris, the man from the basement, the man she'd killed. Taylor's hands shook as she read the article. It was dated 5 years ago. 5 years. How long had this been happening? How many others were there? She felt sick, her mind racing. She had to get rid of the box, get rid of the evidence. But as she stood up, she heard a noise downstairs. A creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. Her breath caught. She wasn't alone. She moved silently, her heart pounding in her ears. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. She crept down the stairs, her eyes scanning the shadows. There was someone in the living room, their back to her. A man. He was holding something, a flashlight maybe, or a knife. She couldn't tell. She froze, her mind screaming at her to run, to hide, to do something. But before she could move, the man turned around. It was Daniel Harris. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, but it was him. He was alive. Taylor's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled back, tripping over her own feet. Daniel lunged at her, his hands reaching for her throat. She scrambled away, her mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But his hands were cold and solid, his grip like iron. She fought back, clawing at his face, kicking and thrashing. She managed to break free, but he was faster, stronger. He caught her by the arm, dragging her back. She screamed, the sound tearing through the silence of the house. She could feel his breath on her neck, cold and rancid, as he whispered, "You thought you could get away with it." In a desperate move, she grabbed a lamp from the side table and swung it at his head. The impact sent him stumbling, and she took the chance to run. She bolted out the door into the night, her bare feet slapping against the pavement. She didn't look back, didn't stop, even when her lungs burned and her legs felt like they might give out. She didn't know how long she ran, but eventually she collapsed in an alley, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She curled up in the shadows, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could still feel his hands on her, still hear his voice in her ears. She didn't know what to do, where to go. She was trapped, caught in a web of her own making. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered, "This isn't over." If you enjoyed this tale of shadows and secrets, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story that lingers long after the screen goes dark. And as you go about your day, remember, the line between dreams and reality is thinner than you think, and sometimes the most dangerous stranger is the one staring back at you in the mirror.
Next story.
The air was crisp that night, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you walk just a little faster. Martha tightened her jacket around her, the sequins of her costume, a last-minute vampire getup, catching the dim glow of the streetlights as she stepped out of the warmth of the party. She hadn't meant to stay so late, but the music had been good, the drinks strong, and the company lively. Now, the streets were empty, the only sound the distant hum of a city winding down for the night. She pulled out her phone, 1:47 a.m., no messages, no missed calls. She sighed, tucking it back into her pocket. It wasn't far to her apartment, just a 15-minute walk through quiet residential streets. She'd done it 100 times before. At first, the footsteps behind her were just a distant echo, something she barely registered over the sound of her own boots clicking against the pavement. But then they grew louder, closer, matching her pace. Martha slowed, the footsteps slowed. Her pulse spiked. She glanced over her shoulder. A man stood beneath a flickering street lamp, his face obscured by a black ski mask. He wasn't moving, just watching. Her breath hitched. Don't panic. Maybe he's just out late too. Maybe it's nothing. She quickened her stride, turning the corner onto Willow Street. The footsteps followed. Her fingers fumbled for her phone again, but before she could unlock it, a voice cut through the silence. Martha. Her blood turned to ice. That wasn't a guess. He knew her name. She spun around. The masked man was closer now, just 20 feet behind her, his posture relaxed, as if this were all part of some sick game. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I like the red dress you wore last week better, though." Her stomach lurched. Last week, she had worn a red dress to a friend's birthday, a private gathering, no strangers, no one who should know. This wasn't random. She ran. Her lungs burned as she sprinted down the sidewalk, her heels slipping on the damp pavement. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps steady, unhurried, like he knew she wouldn't get far. She ducked into an alley, pressing herself against the cold brick wall, her chest heaving. Please, please, just keep going. The footsteps stopped at the alley's entrance. "Martha," he called, sing-song. "You're not very good at hiding." Her breath came in shallow, silent gasps. She could see him from the corner of her eye, his head tilting as he scanned the darkness. One step, then another. He was inside the alley now. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to be invisible. A rustle of fabric, the scrape of a shoe against concrete, then warm breath against her ear. "Found you." She screamed, lashing out blindly, her nails raking across his mask. He grunted, recoiling just enough for her to bolt past him back into the open street. But he was faster. A hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her backward. She stumbled, her knees slamming onto the pavement. Pain shot up her legs, but terror drowned it out. She twisted, kicking, her foot connecting with his shin. He hissed, grip loosening, just enough. She scrambled up, sprinting toward the nearest house with a light on. "Someone, anyone, help me." She pounded on the door, sobbing, her voice raw. "Please, open up! He's gonna kill me!" No answer. Behind her, the masked man stepped into the porch light, his head cocked. "They're not home, Martha. I checked." Her blood ran cold. He'd planned this, every step, every turn. She bolted again, cutting through backyards, her mind racing. Think, where can I go? Her own apartment, it was close. She had a knife in the kitchen, a phone. She just had to make it there. Bursting through her front door, she slammed it shut, locking it with trembling hands. She grabbed the largest knife from the block, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Had she lost him? Then a slow, deliberate knock. "Martha," he crooned, "you forgot to lock the back door." Her heart stopped. She had forgotten. The creak of the door swinging open sent her into motion. She lunged for the bathroom, locking herself inside, her back pressed against the door. The house was silent, too silent. Then a whisper against the wood. "I've been in here before, you know, while you slept." Her stomach twisted. The doorknob jiggled. She had one shot. As the door burst open, she moved, driving the knife forward. It sank into flesh, a guttural cry. The masked man staggered back, clutching his side. She didn't wait. She ran out the front door, into the street, screaming for help. A car screeched to a halt. A neighbor, wide-eyed, shouting into his phone. "Police are coming! Hold on!" Sirens wailed in the distance. The masked man emerged from her house, blood soaking his shirt. His eyes locked onto hers, promising, threatening, before he vanished into the night. The police found her curled on the sidewalk, shaking, her hands stained with blood that wasn't hers. They searched the area, but he was gone. In the days that followed, detectives uncovered disturbing truths. Footprints under her bedroom window. Photos of her, taken without her knowledge. A journal left behind in her apartment, his journal, filled with meticulous notes on her routines, her fears, her life. The last entry written that night: "I'll see you soon, Martha." The case remains open, and somewhere out there, he's still watching. If you enjoyed this chilling tale of terror, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that will haunt your darkest nights. And remember, just because you can't see the watcher in the shadows doesn't mean they aren't there.
Next story.
Sarah had always found solace in the quiet town of St. Francisville, Louisiana. Nestled along the Mississippi River, the town was a picturesque blend of antebellum homes, sprawling oak trees draped in Spanish moss, and a stillness that felt like stepping back in time. For Sarah, it was the perfect refuge. Born deaf and mute, she had learned to navigate the world through her other senses, finding beauty in the vibrations of the earth beneath her feet, the way sunlight filtered through the trees and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. She lived in a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. It was a peaceful life, one she had carefully crafted for herself after years of feeling out of place in a world that often didn't understand her. But lately that peace had begun to unravel. It started with small things Sarah could almost convince herself were figments of her imagination. A book she was certain she had left on the coffee table would be found on the kitchen counter. The curtains in her living room, always drawn shut at night, would be slightly open in the morning. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe the wind had blown the curtains open. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more unsettling. One evening, as she sat on her porch sipping tea, she caught a movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow darting between the trees. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the swaying branches and the fading light of dusk. Days turned into weeks, and the unease deepened. Sarah began to feel as though she was being watched. It was a sensation she couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried. She would wake in the middle of the night, her skin prickling with the awareness of another presence. She would lie perfectly still, her eyes scanning the dark room, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. The house was silent, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive, as though it was hiding something. One night, the feeling became too much to bear. Sarah had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of gardening, but she woke abruptly, her body tense and her heart racing. She sat up, her eyes scanning the dark room. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Slowly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded to the window. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the yard below. She peered out, her breath fogging the glass, and that's when she saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the shadows. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the darkness. He was perfectly still, his gaze fixed on her window. Sarah stumbled back, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the curtains and yanked them shut. She pressed her back against the wall, her chest heaving. Who was he? What did he want? She tried to calm herself, to think rationally. Maybe it was just a neighbor out for a late-night walk, but deep down she knew better. No one lived nearby. The woods were vast and empty, and the nearest house was miles away. The next morning, Sarah tried to convince herself it had been a dream, a trick of the moonlight. But as she went about her day, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She found herself glancing over her shoulder, jumping at every flicker of movement in her peripheral vision. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The back door, which she always kept locked, was slightly ajar. She stared at it, her mind racing. She was certain she had locked it. She always did. Her hands shook as she reached for the door and pushed it shut, turning the lock with a decisive click. She leaned against it, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Someone had been in her house. Someone had been in her house while she slept. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. Sarah began to double-check every lock, every window. She slept with a knife under her pillow, though she knew it would do little to protect her if someone truly wanted to harm her. She started carrying her phone with her at all times, though she couldn't call for help. She could only hope to text someone if the need arose. But who would she text? The police? What would she say? That she felt like she was being watched? That her curtains were open? It sounded ridiculous, even to her. One night, Sarah woke to the sensation of the floor vibrating beneath her feet. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone was in the house. She could feel their footsteps, faint but unmistakable, moving through the rooms below. Her hands trembled as she reached for the knife under her pillow. She crept to the door, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the moon streaming through the windows. She paused at the top of the stairs, her breath shallow. Downstairs, she could see the faint glow of the kitchen light. She never left the kitchen light on. Her grip tightened on the knife as she descended the stairs, each step creaking softly under her weight. The house felt different, colder, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she paused, her eyes scanning the living room. Everything seemed to be in place, but the air was thick with the scent of something metallic, something sharp. Blood. Her stomach churned as she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes widening in horror. The room was a mess. Drawers pulled open, utensils scattered across the floor, and there, in the center of the room, was a pool of dark, sticky blood. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she followed the trail with her eyes, leading to the back door, which was wide open. She took a step forward, her foot slipping in the blood, and that's when she felt it, a presence behind her. She spun around, her knife raised, but there was no one there. The kitchen was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She had to get out. She had to run. But as she turned back toward the door, she saw him, the man from the woods. He was standing in the doorway, his face twisted into a cruel smile. His eyes were dark, empty, devoid of any humanity. Sarah's body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged forward, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade caught the intruder's arm, and he stumbled back with a grunt of pain. Sarah didn't wait to see what he would do next. She bolted out of the kitchen, running for the front door. Her hands fumbled with the lock, her fingers slipping as she tried to turn it. Behind her, she could feel the vibrations of his footsteps as he approached. Finally, the lock clicked, and Sarah yanked the door open, stumbling out into the night. The cool air hit her face, but she didn't stop. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the pavement as she sprinted down the driveway. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but she didn't care. She would take her chances with the trees rather than face the monster in her house. She plunged into the woods, the branches scratching at her arms and face as she ran. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move and shift around her. She could feel the vibrations of the man's footsteps behind her, growing louder as he closed the distance. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on getting as far away as possible. But the woods were vast, and Sarah was quickly becoming disoriented. She had no idea where she was going, no idea how to get back to town. The trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning with the effort. She could feel herself slowing down, her legs growing heavy. She couldn't keep this up much longer. Suddenly she tripped, her foot catching on a root. She fell hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. She scrambled to her feet, but it was too late. The man was on her, his hands grabbing her arms and pinning her to the ground. Sarah thrashed wildly, her silent screams echoing in her mind. She could see his face now, illuminated by the moonlight. His eyes were filled with a terrifying hunger, a desire to destroy. Sarah's hand found a rock, and she swung it with all her might, catching him in the side of the head. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to wriggle free. She didn't hesitate. She ran, her body moving on pure adrenaline. She could feel the vibrations of his footsteps behind her, growing fainter as she put more distance between them. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Finally, she burst out of the woods and onto a road. She didn't recognize it, but she didn't care. She ran down the middle of the road, her chest heaving, her legs threatening to give out. In the distance, she saw the glow of headlights. A car was coming. She waved her arms frantically, tears streaming down her face. The car slowed, then stopped, and a man stepped out, his face filled with concern. Sarah collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with sobs. She couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't tell him about the man in the woods, but it didn't matter. She was safe. For now, she was safe. The man helped her into the car, his voice gentle as he tried to calm her. Sarah stared out the window as they drove away, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't over. The man in the woods wasn't going to stop. He would come for her again, and next time, she might not be so lucky. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale of Sarah's harrowing escape, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Remember, the shadows are always watching, and danger can lurk where you least expect it.
Next story.
The wind whispered through the tall skeletal trees that lined the quiet rural neighborhood where Hannah had just moved. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder that autumn was settling in. The houses were spaced far apart, each one a lonely sentinel in the encroaching darkness. Hannah had chosen this place for its peace, its distance from the chaos of the city. But now, as she stood on the creaking porch of her new home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was too heavy, too watchful. The first few days were uneventful. Hannah spent her mornings unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and exploring the winding trails that snaked through the woods behind her house. She liked the solitude, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long, jagged shadows on the ground. But it was on one of these walks that she first noticed him. He was standing at the edge of the trail, partially hidden by the underbrush. At first, she thought he was just another neighbor, perhaps out for a stroll like her. But there was something about the way he stood, completely still, his eyes fixed on her, that made her skin prickle. She offered a polite smile and a small wave, but he didn't respond. He just stared, his face expressionless, until she quickened her pace and left the trail. The next day, he was there again. This time, he was closer, standing just off the path, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark jacket. Hannah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, that he was just another walker enjoying the woods. But when she passed him, she felt his eyes follow her, burning into her back. She didn't look back, but she could hear the faint crunch of leaves underfoot as he began to follow her. Days turned into weeks, and the man's presence became a constant, unsettling fixture in Hannah's life. He was always there, always watching. She'd see him outside her workplace, leaning against a lamppost, his gaze never wavering. He'd appear at the grocery store, standing at the end of the aisle, his eyes tracking her every move. Once, she even found him sitting in his car outside her house, the engine idling, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. Hannah tried to rationalize his behavior. Maybe he was just lonely, socially awkward. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. There was a coldness in his eyes, a predatory stillness that made her stomach churn. She started locking her doors at night, checking the windows before she went to bed. She stopped taking walks in the woods, opting instead to stay indoors, where she felt or hoped she was safe. But safety was an illusion. One night, as Hannah was washing dishes, she heard a faint tapping at the window above the sink. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned, her hands trembling. The window was dark, the reflection of the kitchen lights obscuring whatever was outside. She told herself it was just a tree branch, the wind. But then the tapping came again, louder this time, more deliberate. She reached for the phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, but before she could dial, the tapping stopped. The silence was worse. She stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on the window. And then slowly a face emerged from the darkness. It was him. His eyes were wide, unblinking, his lips curled into a grotesque smile. He pressed his palm against the glass, his fingers splayed, and Hannah felt a scream rise in her throat. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and the sound seemed to snap her out of her paralysis. She ran to the front door, locking it, then checked every window, every possible entry point. But when she returned to the kitchen, he was gone. The next morning, she called the police. They took her statement, but without evidence, there was little they could do. They promised to patrol the area, but Hannah knew it wouldn't be enough. She could feel him closing in, his presence like a shadow she couldn't shake. Days passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Hannah stopped sleeping, her ears straining for any sound, any sign that he was near. She started carrying a knife in her purse, her fingers curling around the handle whenever she left the house. But no matter how careful she was, he was always one step ahead. One evening, as she was driving home from work, she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought nothing of it, but as she turned onto the narrow, winding road that led to her house, the headlights stayed with her, never falling back, never getting closer. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she glanced in the mirror again. The car was dark, its windows tinted, but she could just make out the silhouette of the driver. It was him. Panic surged through her as she pressed down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward. The road was empty, the trees looming on either side like silent witnesses. She took a sharp turn, her tires screeching, but the car behind her matched her every move. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The road narrowed, the trees closing in, and Hannah realized with a sinking feeling that she was driving deeper into the woods. She glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle was hovering just above empty. She couldn't keep this up much longer. Desperation clawed at her as she scanned the road ahead, looking for a way out. And then she saw it, a small, overgrown path branching off to the right. Without thinking, she swerved onto it, the car bouncing over the uneven ground. The path led to an abandoned cabin, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Hannah slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. She grabbed her purse, her fingers closing around the knife, and bolted from the car. The headlights behind her flicked off, plunging the clearing into darkness. She could hear the sound of a car door opening, then footsteps crunching on the gravel. She ran to the cabin, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and pushed open the door. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. She stumbled inside, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a place to hide. There was a staircase leading to a second floor, but the steps looked rotten, unstable. She didn't have a choice. She climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight, and found herself in a small, cramped room. There was a closet in the corner, its door hanging off its hinges. She squeezed inside, pulling the door shut behind her, and crouched down, her knees pressed to her chest. She could hear him downstairs, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as if he were savoring the hunt. The sound of his voice made her blood run cold. "Hannah," he called, his tone almost playful. "I know you're here." She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob, her body trembling uncontrollably. She could hear him moving through the cabin, opening doors, overturning furniture. He was getting closer. "You can't hide from me," he said, his voice growing louder. "I've been watching you for so long, you belong to me now." The footsteps stopped outside the closet door. Hannah's heart felt like it was going to burst out of her chest. She tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles white. The door creaked open, and she saw his face, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. She lunged at him, the knife slashing through the air. He stumbled back, a look of surprise on his face, and she took the opportunity to bolt past him, down the stairs and out the door. She didn't look back, didn't stop to see if he was following her. She just ran, her legs pumping, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods were a blur of shadows and moonlight as she sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at her face and arms. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps pounding against the ground, his breath ragged and uneven. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. And then through the trees she saw it, a light, a house. She ran toward it, her legs burning, her vision blurring with tears. She pounded on the door, screaming for help, and a moment later it opened. An elderly woman stood there, her face pale with shock. "Please," Hannah gasped, her voice breaking. "He's after me. Please help." The woman pulled her inside, locking the door behind her, and called the police. Hannah collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably as the sound of sirens filled the air. The police found him in the woods, not far from the cabin. He was arrested, charged with stalking and attempted kidnapping. But even as they led him away in handcuffs, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching her, his eyes burning into her soul. She moved out of the neighborhood soon after, leaving behind the house, the woods, and the memories of that night. But no matter how far she ran, she could never escape the feeling of his presence, the knowledge that he was still out there, waiting. and she knew deep down that he would never stop. If you enjoyed this bone-chilling tale of terror, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories that will haunt your dreams. And remember, when the wind whispers through the trees and the silence feels too heavy, it's not just your imagination. Someone or something might be closer than you think. Lock your doors, check your windows, and never let your guard down.
Next story.
Madison had always been drawn to the quiet, the stillness, the kind of silence that wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just that she loved the darkness, it was that she felt at home in it. The way the shadows stretched and twisted, the way the world seemed to hold its breath when the sun dipped below the horizon. It was her sanctuary. But tonight, the darkness felt different. It felt alive, watching, waiting. It had been one of those days. Madison had woken up late, her alarm blaring at her like an angry parent. She'd hit snooze once, twice, 3 times until the morning had slipped away from her. She'd planned to go for her usual morning jog, the one that always left her muscles aching and her mind clear. But the weight of her blankets had been too comforting, the pull of sleep too strong. By the time she'd dragged herself out of bed, the sun was high in the sky, and the thought of jogging in the heat made her groan. "I'll go later," she'd told herself, though later never came. Now, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she cursed her laziness. Her body wasn't tired, her mind wasn't calm, and sleep was a distant dream. She'd tried everything, counting sheep, deep breathing, even that ridiculous meditation app her friend had recommended. But nothing worked. The clock on her nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m., and frustration bubbled up inside her like a pot about to boil over. She kicked off the covers and sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. If she couldn't sleep, she might as well do something productive, or at least something that would tire her out. The decision to go for a jog at this ungodly hour wasn't one she made lightly. The woods behind her house were dark and quiet, the kind of place that most people avoided after sunset. But Madison wasn't most people. She loved the trail that wound through the trees, the way the moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground. It was peaceful, or at least it usually was. She pulled on her jogging clothes, a pair of black leggings, a hoodie, and her worn-out sneakers, and grabbed her phone and earbuds. The house was silent as she crept downstairs, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She paused at the front door, her hand hovering over the lock. Something felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath, but she shook the feeling off. It was just her imagination, she told herself. Just the lack of sleep playing tricks on her. The night air was cool against her skin as she stepped outside, the faint scent of pine and damp earth filling her nostrils. She popped in her earbuds and started her jog, the rhythmic thud of her footsteps against the dirt path calming her nerves. The woods were darker than usual, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. But Madison didn't mind. She liked the darkness. It made her feel invisible, like she was the only person in the world. At first, everything was normal. The sound of her breathing, the crunch of leaves under her feet, the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. But then something changed. It was subtle at first, a rustling in the bushes, a snap of a twig. Madison slowed her pace, her heart skipping a beat. She pulled out one earbud and listened, her eyes scanning the trees. The sound stopped. She told herself it was just an animal, a deer or a raccoon, but the unease in her chest didn't go away. She started jogging again, faster this time, her her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The rustling started again, louder this time, like something or someone was keeping pace with her. She glanced over her shoulder, but the path behind her was empty. The sound was coming from the trees, from the shadows. She stopped dead in her tracks, her heart pounding in her ears. The rustling stopped too. The woods were silent, too silent, like the world was holding its breath. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer, just the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and frantic. She told herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks on her. But the fear was real, a cold, heavy weight in her chest. She turned and started running, her feet pounding against the dirt path. She didn't stop until she reached her house, her lungs burning, her legs shaking. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was quiet, the familiar creak of the floorboards comforting. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that there was nothing out there. But the fear lingered, a shadow in the back of her mind. She went upstairs to her room, her legs still trembling. She peeled off her sweaty clothes and stepped into the shower, the hot water washing away the dirt and the fear. By the time she got out, she felt almost normal again. She pulled on a clean pair of pajamas and sat down on her bed, letting out a deep breath. She was tired now, her body finally ready to sleep. She reached for her phone to set an alarm, but before she could, something grabbed her. It happened so fast she didn't have time to scream. Two hands shot out from under the bed, cold and strong, wrapping around her ankles like a vice. She kicked out instinctively, her heart racing, her mind screaming. The hands tightened their grip, pulling her toward the edge of the bed. She kicked again, harder this time, and felt her foot connect with something solid. The hands let go, and she scrambled off the bed, her breath coming in panicked gasps. She didn't stop to think. She ran for the door, her legs moving on their own. She glanced back just once, just long enough to see the man crawling out from under her bed. He was tall and thin, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes dark and empty. He was smiling, a wide, twisted grin that made her stomach churn. She slammed the door shut behind her and ran down the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to get away. She stumbled into the spare room and locked the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the knob. She leaned against the door, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She needed to call for help, but her phone was still in her bedroom. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on the landline phone on the nightstand. She grabbed it and dialed 911, her fingers trembling as she pressed the buttons. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, steady, a lifeline in the chaos. There's someone in my house, Madison whispered, her voice shaking. He was under my bed. He's still here. Please, you have to help me. Okay, I need you to stay calm, the operator said. Can you tell me your address? Madison opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, the only sound the faint hum of the phone line. Madison's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her back against the door, her eyes scanning the room. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in on her from all sides. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and frantic, like a drum in her ears. And then she saw him. He was outside the window, his face pressed against the glass, his wide, empty eyes staring right at her. He was smiling that same twisted smile, his teeth gleaming in the moonlight. Madison screamed, the sound tearing through the silence. She dropped the phone and backed away from the window, her legs trembling. The man started climbing, his fingers gripping the windowsill, his movements slow and deliberate. Madison didn't think, she just ran. She bolted out of the room and down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to get away. She ran through the kitchen, her hands fumbling for the back door. She yanked it open and stumbled outside, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She didn't stop running until she reached the woods, the trees closing in around her like a protective shield. She crouched behind a tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear him coming, his footsteps crunching against the leaves. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sound of her breathing. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then she heard his voice, low and guttural, like the growl of an animal. "I know you're here," he said, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. "You can't hide from me." Madison's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She pressed herself against the tree, her eyes squeezed shut. She could hear him moving, his footsteps getting closer. She didn't know what to do. She was trapped, helpless, like a mouse caught in a snake's gaze. And then, just when she thought it was over, she heard a sound. A car engine, loud and unmistakable. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. Madison didn't waste a second. She bolted, her legs moving on their own. She didn't look back, didn't stop to think. She just ran, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't stop until she reached the road, her legs giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the pavement, her body trembling. The car was coming closer, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Madison raised a hand, her vision blurry with tears. The car screeched to a halt, and a man jumped out, his face pale with shock. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Madison couldn't answer. She just nodded, her body shaking uncontrollably. The man helped her into the car, his hands gentle but firm. As they drove away, Madison glanced back at the woods, her heart still racing. She could see him standing at the edge of the trees, his dark eyes watching her, his twisted smile still plastered on his face. She didn't know if she'd ever feel safe again, but for now, she was alive, and that was enough. If you enjoyed Madison's harrowing escape from the shadows that lurked in the darkness, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a spine-chilling tale. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones hiding under your bed. They're the ones already inside your home waiting for the lights to go out. Sleep with one eye open because you never know who or what might be watching. Until next time, stay safe if you can.